Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Brandywine School District Board of Education regular meeting. Tonight is Monday, June 13th, 2022. We are here live in the BHS auditorium, also via Zoom broadcast. Ms. Karbinsky, may I please have a roll call?
Mr. Scrobot.
Here.
Miss Pigeon.
Here.
Mr. Ackerman.
Present.
Miss Gordon. Mr. Heller.
Here.
Reverend Perry.
Here.
Miss Stock.
Here.
6 present, 1 absent.
Thank you very much. At this time, I would like to ask Ms. Pigeon to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before I entertain a motion to approve the agenda, I want to highlight a couple changes for the board. First, we will be moving old business 9A, Wilmington Learning Collaborative, to immediately follow special presentation item B for the Wilmington Learning Collaborative. I would propose under section 7, personnel matters, we remove employee matter 21-115. I believe those were the only 2 changes. With that, I will accept to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Second, and just to clarify, it's 22-115, not 21.
22-115. Thank you, Mr. Ackerman. Motion, Reverend Perry. Motion, second, Mr. Ackerman. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And also, ladies and gentlemen, sadly, we began our meeting last month with a moment of silence in memory of a beloved employee, Claymont staff member Sharon Snyder. Tonight, unfortunately, I come before you again to ask for a moment of silence in memory of Bush student Annabella Haynes Harris, who tragically passed away 2 weeks ago. Loss is always very difficult, especially so when it is a young child who has yet to show us all that they would grace us with in this world. So we please ask for a moment of silence and that you keep their family and the entire BSD community in our thoughts. Thank you. Beginning.
The Brandywine Education Foundation presents scholarships annually to students in the Brandywine School District. With our return to in-person, unfortunately, we were unable to get to Mount's awards program. In the last couple of weeks, we have participated in Concord's and Brandywine's. And so tonight we would like to present the awards for Mount Pleasant. So when I call your name, if you'd come up, and we'll present the award and get a quick picture. First one tonight is one of our general awards, and it's for Carrie. And how do you say your last name? So, Carrie, come on up. One of the questions on the application is, how would a scholarship from BEF help you achieve your academic and career goals? And he said, a scholarship from the Brandywine Education Foundation will assist me in my financial stability in and out of college and help me better focus on working to change the world because I'm not waiting for after college to start. Congratulations. The next award is given through the Hamby Trust, the Albert Thatcher Hamby Trust, which runs the camp where the Y has their outdoor camp, sponsored 3 scholarships, and the Albert Thatcher scholarship. They have graciously sponsored 3 scholarships, and that goes to Mason Heath Alford. And he's not here tonight because he's one of our athletes that is participating in the blue and gold football team. And so he's at practice tonight. Next award goes to Caleb Steinberg, which is also one of our Oriental Lodge number 27 scholarships. Caleb. The next 3 are new scholarships this year and have great importance for the Brandywine School District and for this area. On the last day of History Month in 2021, the Brandywine Education Foundation launched an effort to tell the story of the Claymont 12. They and their parents were the center of one of the greatest civil rights cases of the 20th century. The case of Belton versus Gebhardt, along with the companion case of Buell versus Gebhardt, were consolidated and decided in 1952. Both cases were filed by the noted Lewis L. Redding and Jack Greenberg to challenge Delaware's segregated schools. And they were decided by Colin Setz, who was on Chancery Court in 1952 and whose son is now our Chief Justice. Both sides appealed to the state Supreme Court, which affirmed the Chancery Court decision in August of 1952. After waiting for the state board to issue written permission for the 12 African-American students to be admitted to Claymont, and it was not coming, the board held a special meeting on September 3rd, 1952 to admit them anyway. The state board, however, did phone into the meeting and give verbal permission. On September 4th, 1952, 11 of the 12 entered Claymont without incident. The lead plaintiff, whose name was on the case, Ethel Louise Belton, decided to remain at Howard as her family had moved closer to that school during the trial. These 2 Delaware cases were appealed to the United States Supreme Court by the state of Delaware and became part of Brown versus Board of Education, which was decided 9-0 in favor of integration in 1954. The Delaware cases were the only ones that had been affirmed by Brown, as they were the only ones to admit African-American students to previously all-white schools. Too few people here in Delaware have little or no idea that our role in this important court case, and indeed even in our district, played in this landmark case, and we aim to change that. We plan to bring the light of history to the case and the students who had a role to play. We want to ensure that all of the students in the Brandywine School District learn the importance of this case to our state, our district, and our nation. With that, I will present the first 3 scholarships from the Claymont 12 Fund to 3 of our graduating seniors from Mount Pleasant. The first one goes to Anna Craig. Anna. The second one, I did not get a check-in, but we'll see if they're here. Jalen Gordon. Jalen, you here? And the third of our Claymont 12 scholarships is unable to be with us tonight, but it's Chad Isaac from Mount Pleasant. I wear several hats, and I'd like to also ask Jason Heller if he would approach. Chad Isaac. All right, there we go. A check for $1,000 for the robotics program. Jason. Jason Hale, can I ask you to come up, please? That way I don't have to present a check to myself. Yeah. On behalf of the Albert Thatcher Hamby Trust, I'd like to present, oh, Jason, I gave you the wrong check. Too many Jasons.
Which one's bigger?
Contribution to the foundation in the amount of $9,500. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Hamby. Congratulations to all our winners. I know some of the other awards were given out to the different schools. So thank you to our Mount Pleasant students coming by tonight to be recognized. Moving on to special guest Secretary Holodeck and Governor Carney here to provide us with an update on the Wilmington Learning Collaborative.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, members of the board, Mr. Holler. Thanks for giving us the opportunity once again to speak to all of you and for your engagement on the WLC, Wilmington Learning Collaborative, since last fall. A special thank yous to Reverend Perry and President Scrobot for representing the board and the districts in the negotiations over the agreement for the WLC. Also want to thank Reverend Perry, Mr. Scrobot, and Ms. Pigeon for attending some of our community meetings. Harlan educator Margie Peters also met with our team and attended negotiated meetings, and we're grateful for her collaboration. Brandywine Education Associate and President Steve Rulon and UNISERV Director David Davies have also been active, and we appreciate their collaboration as well. And finally, I'd like to thank Harlan Principal Tracy Roberts. She's been great. And for Superintendent Holler and your team for your continued engagement and partnership. You really have been good partners in this initiative already. Let me start by mentioning two things that I'm sure we have in common. First, we all want to do the right thing for all of our children. And we're all searching for the right way to do that. And we're all a little frustrated that we haven't found a way to give the students the support they need and deserve. Second, we all have our own ideas about what the solution is. And every single one of us wishes the document that we have that we presented to the board and you'll talk about later looks a little bit different than it does. Include myself in that. You don't get elected governor to a school board unless you have some pretty strong feelings and some reasonably good ideas, and I understand that. But this agreement is the product of numerous meeting hours and hours of door knocking in communities across the city, including this weekend around Harlan Elementary and months of community engagement. It's no surprise that we have more good ideas than we're able to include in the document, and ultimately that we'll be able to implement on the ground. But here's the bottom line for me. We could continue to squabble over details, and details are important. Why this group doesn't get a larger voice than another, or why did this nearly year-long effort of community engagement to form the WLC will be consigned to a shelf in a growing library of reports and commissions with a lot of great ideas that nobody could agree on. We all care about the city of Wilmington and its children that this district serves. I, like some of you, live in the city. We all care about how their future and the support that they get now. Please don't let this opportunity slip through our grasp to strengthen our schools, to give the Wilmington community a greater voice, and to finally reverse the momentum and start making progress for all these children. What I'm asking you to agree to is not nearly the end. In fact, it'll be the beginning of a collaboration, educator and parent-driven process and structure that will provide our city schools with, we think, a burst of attention, resources, and support they so sorely need. You as a district board will continue to have a strong voice in these schools, no question about it, with a city board member and your superintendent having a formal seat at the table on the Wilmington Learning Collaborative Board. But for the first time since desegregation, members of the Wilmington community will have a larger say in how their schools are run. And that's as it should be, because they have the most at stake. We all have a lot at stake. We have to fix this system, and we think that this is the best next step forward. I understand that this is a big decision and that many of you have mixed feelings about it. But in some ways, though, it's a simple choice. I wouldn't be standing in front of you tonight. I wouldn't be knocking on doors as I was this afternoon if things were working as they should. I believe that if we do more of the same, we're going to get more of the same. I believe strongly that working together, we can do better by these children. I'm here because I want to partner with you to forge a new and different path towards helping these children that are so important to all of us. I hope you'll accept our partnership by voting next month to sign the agreement. I certainly want to thank you again for your engagement to this point. And we look forward to the questions, important questions that I'm sure you have on the agreement that we've come up with. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Governor.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see all of you. And to echo the thanks that the governor shared with or for Reverend Perry and Mr. Scrobot for your participation in the MOU process, and for all of the board members attending various meetings, either virtually or in person, it is much appreciated. We know you're busy, and committing to that is greatly appreciated. So the last time I was here was in January, and I shared with you that I had been remotely participating or listening to conversations around the Wilmington Learning Collaborative. And since that time, I have gotten directly involved, attending a number of in-person and virtual meetings and convenings, both in communities and in schools, with your teachers at Harlan, other teachers in Christina and Red Clay, at the Latin American Community Center, a couple of times, as recently as Saturday at the Teen Warehouse, where we have been able to hear directly from students, parents, a lot more grandparents than one would think or imagine, community members, advocates, board members, And what I'm most pleased with since the last time we've met is that we've been able to capture what we've heard in the current draft MOU. If you were to thoroughly review it, and I'm sure you have, you might even notice your own voice, ideas or opinions being captured. I'll give you a couple of examples that I noted within the MOU. We heard from the Harlan teachers directly about the importance of after-school extended learning programming and how they can't do that themselves. So currently in most schools, not all, the teachers themselves are doing the work with students during extended day. Some of our schools, including Harlan, by the way, have some partnerships, but they directly express the desire and the need for more of that with community-based and faith-based organizations. That is embedded within the MOU itself. Came directly from them. I will say they weren't the only teacher group we heard that from. Your superintendent, Link Holer, early in the process, so about halfway through the process, had a great idea of let's identify a lead person in each district that would work directly with the Wilmington Learning Collaborative. One person from Brandywine, one from Christina, one from Red Clay. Great idea that is embedded within the MOU. At the January meeting, Mr. Ackerman shared concerns around transportation and accessibility for students. And while we can't make commitments, that's addressed to an extent within the MOU. We agree that Wilmington students for far too long haven't had the same kind of access to school choice and other options or after-school programming or summer programming as other students, just based on a transportation issue. There's the potential for us to address that. Reverend Perry, in one of our meetings about a month or so ago, you made it crystal clear that parents needed to have a strong voice on the board. And we have identified within the MOU that there would be one parent from every district, not one parent representing all three, but one from each. And then finally, I would mention very early in the MOU process, Mr. Scrobot made it clear that he felt that the size of the board was really important, that each district having a superintendent as well as a school board member made up 6, and that group of 6 should be equally represented as the others that are going to be coming onto the board. Well, at one point during the negotiations, I think the number got as high as 19. So behind the scenes, our team was talking, saying 19. That's a hard number to manage. I'm pleased to say we've gotten that number after many, many conversations that you were part of, Reverend Perry was part of, Mr. Holer was part of. We gotten that number to 12 representatives, including student voice. So I want to hammer home the importance of delivering on what we said we were going to do, because one of the things we heard in this meeting in January was you need to make sure you're in the community and you're listening, and that is considered when building this plan, and it has been. As the governor said, there are a lot of great ideas. This plan could be absolutely massive in an attempt to appease everyone's interests, desires, hopes. I think John Sheehan and the team, in particular, John has just done an amazing job of taking all of it, tying a lot of it together, and building a plan that, as I read, just makes sense for kids. And I think that's the question we need to keep asking ourselves and coming back to is, does this make sense for kids? So after door knocking with the governor on Saturday around Harlan and having a wonderful time, because I ran into some of my old students who are now parents, from when I was at Concord High School as an assistant principal and principal. It was a great this is the right thing to do because we're not at a place we need to be. And you're probably already aware of some of that. And we haven't actually been for some time, but based on what we've been through over the past 2.5 years and the kind of impact it's had on literacy and mathematic rates and the social emotional well-being of our kids, they don't only deserve this, they need it. And so when we come back next month, we hope that you join us and we collaborate to really make the kind of improvements that these children deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Holliday. So I guess hearing your presentation, that kind of moves us to item 9A, which we moved on the agenda of old business regarding the Wilmington Learning Collaborative Draft Agreement. So Superintendent Holler, I don't know if you have any comments before, or we're just going to open it up to the board to ask questions of the governor and the secretary, comments on the draft, additions.
Just an opening comment, then I'll let the board ask questions or participate in the discussion. I would like to thank John Sheehan, Jim Simmons, Dr. Holliday for hearing what was being said. It was a pretty aggressive timeline. We shared that we were uncomfortable with the timeline and you responded. Dr. Holliday mentioned several examples where voice from Brandywine was evident in the agreement. I can tell you that there were many pieces as I read through that agreement that resonated with specifically the comments that came from Brandywine. So I just want to say thank you, because that's not always the case. Sometimes it's straightforward, like a freight train, bulldozing your way through and not listening. And I do understand the need to hear and listen to a variety of stakeholder groups. And I think you've accomplished that in the agreement. And I'll refrain from comments. I'll let the board take that time and might follow up on some at the end.
Mr. Holler, if I could just one moment, just thank John Sheehan. He's been really incredible in just listening and bringing, I can't even imagine how many phone conversations he's had and trying to incorporate just what you're talking about, really listening and trying to incorporate what he heard from everyone into it. It's impossible to do that, obviously, but I can't think of anybody who's worked harder to do that than John, and I certainly owe him a debt of gratitude for that.
Does anybody from the board want to start? Have a question? You want to be first? I guess I will start. Certainly, I think the ongoing question has been certainly the financial component to it. I mean, this is a big ask, and the concern has been, is the proposed budget enough? How do we see that going forward? What flexibilities are there to increase that funding as, if you see the successes that you're hoping to see?
Let me just, I think the answer clearly is that this is a starting point. I can tell you one area in particular where we need to push the envelope, and that is in early education and preschool education. Part of the issue there is we don't have the dollar for preschool. And if we want to have an efficient and effective funding mechanism for preschool, we need to get a dollar return for each dollar. That doesn't mean it's not important to have after-school support for folks going to work, which is what that program, it came out of the whole welfare reform initiative of the mid-1990s. And so it's outdated in my view, and we've got folks that are working on that. So that's one area. I think getting the collaborative up and running, we'll learn more about what are the other needs. We've heard a lot about the kind of supports that students need. We mentioned here at this board meeting our current investment in opportunity funding. Opportunity funding goes to schools with children that are from low-income backgrounds and English learners. And we've made a commitment, a legal commitment, to increase that significantly over the next couple of years in a settlement with the NAACP. So there are additional resources coming anyway. And I think once the WLC gets up and running and starts to identify, we have lots of ideas. The question is, what are the ideas for different in different schools and in different groups of children? So the collaborative itself, I think we're going to want to keep pretty tight as a team there. And so with them and the two and your superintendent and your board member that will be represented on the board, you're going to be getting direct feedback, what's happening on the ground. And you have that help. We look at it as force multiplier. Jim Simmons talks about it all the time in terms of capacity to do what needs to be done. So I don't know whether that answers your question. The question is, yes, we're going to need more, and more is already pledged to be coming.
Great. And I know in the draft, it talks about, an assessment of district and school practices and needs and root cause analysis. I guess getting to this point, I think we have a pretty good idea of what a lot of the issues are. What still a lot of broader social issues that may not be addressed by this. We talk about, building engagement through this WLC. In my mind, there are lots of opportunities for parents at any school to engage. We have board meetings, we have PTOs, we have school events. What makes this different to really drive that level of engagement that will ultimately be required to make this a success?
Mr. Scrobot, I'll answer your second question, and then I think your first question, I'll turn to your superintendent because he was directly involved in the conversation around a needs assessment. So what's different in the Wilmington Learning Collaborative is that we are going to have teacher leader councils. Empowering teachers is I believe a very important component, and then equally component are your community councils. So within the MOU that you have, it is not an option, it's a must. And the executive director who was brought on is responsible to make sure each school has a community team, I would call them, that works very collaboratively with the teacher leader council, but also sends information to the Wilmington Learning Collaborative board. I think that's the big difference between past efforts. And then the final point I would make is that the difference between this and many of the efforts of the past goes back to something that was mentioned early on here, and that is everything was pushed down on schools, partnership zone, et cetera. They were pre-baked plans, whereas in this case, the schools themselves will develop the plans. I have some, what I think Mark Holodick thinks are great ideas for what we should do immediately, but it's not Mark Holodick's decision. It should be the decision of the teacher councils, leadership councils, the community councils working with the Wilmington Learning Collaborative leadership team and board. Mr. Holler, do you want to address the
where we brought in a third party to do an open and honest needs assessment. I also think back to Bsd when it faced turnaround. And again, we had a fresh perspective come in, because there are times when you don't see the error of your own ways and you need a third party perspective to come in and help point out those deficiencies. So I think that's the value of doing what I kind of termed an open and honest needs assessment, because we all brag about what we do, but in the spirit of continuous improvement, we are wise to listen to outside views and consider that in our change practice.
Anybody else, comments?
I have just a few specific questions regarding the MOU. In section 3.3, that it's mentioned that each district commits one staff member who's mutually agreed upon for a period of at least 2 years. Is that like a 60-40 split time? Like, is that a full-time position from the district commitment?
Yeah, so I don't know that we've determined exactly what the ratio would be in terms of that person's commitment to these schools. I think I mentioned that we have it in years past in this district. We've committed people to those schools. And I don't know that it's that it's realistic that they would spend 100% of the time at one building. So my thinking is that Link Holler, working with the Wilmington Learning Collaborative Executive Director, along with some of his colleagues, along with you as a board, would be best positioned to determine how much time that person would commit. I would anticipate, Ms. Pigeon, in the beginning, it would be an awful lot. And then once it's up and running and the executive director is in, I would imagine that person would be able to, in terms of the time commitment, I'll use the phrase slide back a bit. But at this point, I wouldn't commit.
Staff members, just trying to find where that was. So there's something in here that references staffing units and units earned, that the schools would be staffed with all units earned by September 30th unit count, and any additional units as needed. So I guess my issue with that is, can you just explain how you would see it played out if a district, there were disagreements, or there were kind of districts weren't on the same page as to what additional units, so that how would that be equitable among all of the schools within the learning collaborative? It's, let's say one district has more staff invested in the school, and then how do you then see growth and measure effectiveness if districts aren't equally providing resources?
Well, being that we're in Brandywine, I'll use it as an example. You have always historically overstaffed Harlan Elementary School, right? So I think the point of that language is to ensure that there's no expectation on our part that we would in any way take what you currently do and count those positions, against anything that any of the other schools in the collaborative choose to do, right? So the plan that Harlan Elementary develops, I'll use an example. They might determine that they need smaller class sizes at a particular grade level, even with the additional staffing that the district currently provides. And that is something we've heard consistently across all three districts is class size is critically important, more resources around social emotional learning, more positions where folks could engage directly with families to try to bring down the absenteeism. The point of that language is to indicate that what the team or school determines, in this case, Harlan, to do would not come from what you're already investing locally. Does that make sense?
So that does, but then is that what you're saying, that the collaborative will then supplement what is needed if the district isn't
And so we want within our plan to use some of our resources to hire some additional counselors and or interventionists, and or it could be a school psychologist, et cetera.
Just want to interrupt for 1 minute. Just want to make sure that we're okay here with the Zoom link. I know it keeps shuffling, but I had a couple messages that people couldn't get in. So I just want to make sure that 57 seems a little bit low. I know the school year has ended and maybe that's down, but I just want to make sure we're good with the link. So, okay. Anyone else comments?
I definitely think you've been listening, because I look at 9.2, which addresses city students in schools not within the city limits. And I'm very happy to see that acknowledged within the plan. The one thing that I don't see sort of called out, and Superintendent Haller has said that we are looking to include Harlan in this, but not PS at the present time. I don't see where that's called out within the agreement.
The building of the structure, and we'll monitor. And at some point in time, yeah, we're interested in thinking through with the collaborative, how do we include the other 600 students who don't go to Harlan but reside in the city. I know the plan says that a special document of best practices will be developed, but I think we all agree that from our district office, sitting in and with the representatives from Red Clay and Christina, along with that executive director, as those critical pieces are flushed out, because this is a high level document and there's a ton of details that still need to be worked through. So what's recorded in this plan for Harlan does affect 1/3 of our elementary city age students. And we care just as deeply about that other 2/3 and realize that this is a process that has to be developed and then built upon. And we're hopeful, encouraged that that's going to happen.
If I could just comment on that, that's a really, really important point, right? And that is, you have, what'd you say, 600 plus whatever students who live in the city, but attend schools out in the suburb. There's a very specific objective that you're trying to achieve there, one that we all support. And so we really have to focus on that. And how do we support those children outside of a school? How do we provide support for the families? How do we, to John's question earlier about the other supports that are needed? And it's different. So you're the only district that does it. Thank God that you do. And I think you have a better system as a result of it. And we need to be very conscious of that those objectives don't collide, that they're done in concert so that everybody rises with that, right? So we met, Mark and I, one of the doors on Saturday, the woman 2 blocks away from Harlan, and she had one child with special needs, and decided to send her other child to Claymont Elementary, which is pretty far away. We don't want to discourage that, right? But we want to support those families and those students, if that makes sense. So we're very conscious that we don't have that issue as much in the other districts for the obvious reasons.
So I know a big part of this has been talked about with the wraparound services. I think this speaks to a broader issue in education of, students who need, physical and behavioral health needs. A lot of time this pulls them out of class. So, I just want to make sure that the academic focus, while we do list engaging on-campus and off-campus field trips, I think those are wonderful ideas. We talk about extended day enrichment, arts, sports, foreign language, band, chorus, theater, all those things are very important, and I recognize their contribution into engaging students and getting them to learn. I just, for the participating schools, and this might be more of a comment than a question, but I think there's going to be a large accountability piece, not only for the WLC and, their don't let enrichment turn into, it should still have a focus on the academic piece, the ELA and the math, starting there, building upon that, getting that success, and then, expanding it.
I think we understand and agree that those other opportunities can't be a distraction. They have to have impact on the students that are accessing those services. That's incredibly important. It's easy to say in a meeting here. Mr. Scrobat, you and I have talked many times at different places, at different hours about the impact or the adverse effects of trauma that so many of our students experience coming into our schools, and expecting our schools to be able to address all of those concerns throughout the course of a day. And then they go home and often experience the same kind of trauma. And that's not going to be fixed overnight. What can have the greatest kind of impact, I believe, is a partnership like this, a collaborative effort where we leverage services, not just community-based organizations, but access to whether it be DPH, DHSS. We've been in a number of meetings recently, the governor and I, around homelessness, involving some of your people, mind you. And in fact, your lead homeless person provided us with an outstanding report on what's really happening in the field. And all of that information needs to be taken into consideration. I'm hopeful that because the Department of Ed is involved and the governor's office is involved, that we would be able to access and help support through other agencies, maybe a bit differently and more effectively than we would otherwise without having this kind of collaborative.
I have a question about the finances. First of all, thank you for stating that the new funding is in addition to the opportunity funding. So I understand that the 7 million will be divided by the 8 participating schools. The 12 million from the Reading Consortium, How is that going to work? Is that also going to be divided evenly between the 8 schools, the 12 million? So how would that be determined?
Hey, if it's all right, I'm going to jump in. Hello, Kim. Good to see you.
Hi.
Good to see you, members of the board. So the 7 million, as was mentioned, is going to participating schools. The Reading Consortium, as most folks know, have worked on a number of recommendations, most of which impact city schools. And so in this year's budget, between the operating budget and supplemental, I believe the number is 12.8 million. And again, a significant portion of those resources impact these schools. So for instance, Bayard and Bancroft received a wraparound service grant, I want to say around $1 million. And so that funding will help those students, supplemented by the additional funding from the WLC fund. So we envision this total with 19.8 million, hopefully working together. So we're not duplicating, but leveraging close to 20 million to support students. And so they have a little bit of a different process for how their recommendations go. They have some pre-K recommendations that will be citywide. They have a number of professional learning. And so we sort of view it in tandem, but how it's distributed is something that the Reading Consortium works through. We just hope that all of the funding works together to best support students.
So
Just to be clear, they decide, right? The Reading Commission is a commission established by the legislature. And they're looking at a lot of different approaches to improve the opportunities for the children. And so we essentially set aside resources so that they could go through their list and decide how that money should be spent.
this might be another follow-up to Mr. Sheehan there. So in section 5.5, it's talking about the WLC team may use some of this funding for citywide initiatives. How are we delineating citywide initiatives versus initiatives that'll directly impact the schools that are participating?
Yeah, so that was sort of providing some flexibility to the WLC council and team. And so one of the recommendations from a Lewis teacher was to create a teaching fellows initiative across city schools to help recruit and retain so that we can make sure we have a good pipeline, partnerships with DSU, UD, additional pre-K seats. And so giving them some flexibility to work with the community to, you know, if a small piece of that 7 million would be to create a teaching fellows program for the city, they would have the flexibility to develop something like that.
So do you foresee in, let's say, in year one, will the individual schools, I know the individual schools will still have their own budgets related to the schools, but for the WLC, will there be a dedicated budget that will show where this 7 million is going within the schools?
Yeah, so yes, I think we put in there, and I have it here if I dig through it, that there's going to be a significant transparency around that 7 million for a few reasons. One, because it's good practice to do that, but also I think to a couple of the points made earlier, to show what's working. And so if Harlan is spending a certain amount of money on an after-school tutoring program and we're seeing children grow in third grade reading, we have the ability to say, we spent this money on this and look at the benefit it's having. And so absolutely, there'll be transparency about how that money is being spent. And I believe we wrote that in there. I'll find that and shoot it to you in an email.
So I have a question. I see some of our teachers here tonight. So I have a question about the educator leader teams. So, we know that the teachers especially have more and more put on their plate every year with the same amount of time to accomplish it. So to the point that it's certainly impacted this year, especially staff volunteering for extra responsibilities like coaching and other EPR opportunities. So my question is, what's the plan to identify and incentivize individuals to join the ELT? Since that's really what this whole plan counts on, is the bottom-up model. So there would have to be some level of engagement there to make that effective. So I'm concerned that perhaps it might be a challenge to get the numbers that we need.
Yeah, Mr. Heller, having met with now a lot of the teachers at Harlan, I don't think you're going to be hard pressed for teacher leaders to step up. I think they want to be empowered. I think they want to have voice in decision making, and it's not to say they don't. I mean, I think Ms. Roberts empowers teachers already. I mean, that's been the model in this district under your current superintendent, and you have the kind of principal there who just buys into distributive leadership. This is a little bit different because it's very formalized. So I think just the idea of them having some authority in decision making and collaborating I mean, one of the ideas as an example that came out of a meeting with Harlan teachers was, we heard this loud and clear, we need differentiated professional development at times, and we also need to support our novice teachers. The mentoring program should look different in our schools. Now, it just so happens that at the Department of Ed, we have Tiffany Green, who oversees the changes that are happening with our mentoring programs, and she completely agrees. She was an amazing Harlan teacher for many years. So some things, I'll say the stars are aligning around some of this, and to not belabor the point having to do with the challenges these kids are facing. And I mentioned homelessness. I was pretty moved a few weeks ago. Jim Simmons and I took a tour, a couple-hour tour of the Hope Center. And you have kids at the Hope Center from Brandywine, as does Christina and Red Clay. And it's new. It's what, Governor, about a year old. It's heartbreaking, quite frankly. And there are some educational programs that are running in the afternoons and evenings for those kids, but there's just so much more. And it's no one's fault that it's not more robust, because we've been living through COVID. But this is Mark Holodick thinking he has a good idea. So, but wouldn't it be powerful if our 3 districts could collaborate on what to do when families are at the Hope Center? And is there a more consistent model that could be used to support them both academically, socially, and emotionally? Because I can tell you, based on the folks I talked to there's a whole lot of trauma going on. So Mr. Scrubbat, I do agree. I think that there's so much. It has got to have an academic focus. 3rd grade literacy, incredibly important to all of us, especially the governor. I totally agree with that. But there's also some other things that have to be addressed.
Any additional board comments?
By the way, Mr. Scrubbat, I'd like to have one big aggressive goal for 3rd grade reading and middle school math, just to your earlier point.
Absolutely. So I did have a final comment. I don't know if you want to.
I just wanted to follow up on Mr. Heller's comment. I think of the leadership that Tracy Roberts has put in at Harlan, and I agree 100% with Secretary Holodick. She is a very hands-on, gathers input, insight from her teachers. And I see that the ELT will allow that to continue. And at the end of the day, there has to be a final decision maker around that. And that's still, correct me if I'm wrong, the role of the principal to gather that input and be the final decision maker, right? So that won't be lost in this. I have had a conversation with Secretary Holodick. There's a piece in there around some of the leadership appointments that I just have a little concern on, to make sure that at the end of the day, those individuals are still our employees and they are vetted and approved by the district instead of a third party, as you may call the WLC council. We'll definitely, our interview process for principal, we always include parents, we include teachers. We'll continue that. The executive director would be a key member of that interview team, so that we are making well-rounded decisions around leadership in the buildings that we have.
I would say that's where the word collaborative really comes in to play.
And I know the focus of all the things that teachers have been asked to do over the last decades. The things get added to the plate, and we haven't addressed it's all being asked within the same hours of the school day. Students have, whether it's wraparound services, IEPs, things that pull them out of the classroom, and we haven't added any time to the day. We haven't added any days to the year. We really need to address that in addition to teacher pay. And I know it's expensive, but if we're talking about, smaller class sizes, these are concepts that will work throughout education. And my ask is that gets some serious consideration in parallel with any work that's being done, with the WLC.
Absolutely. And I think right now it's the case with all employers. Compensation, the competition out there for employees is intense. We have a teacher shortage, and so we're going to have to, and we compete with states around us for graduates of the University of Delaware, Delaware State University. And so we're going to have to, we're looking at that question. We've got to make a move there. We've got a group that's going to be re-empowered to do that and find ways to attract teachers at all of our schools, not just the Wilmington Learning Collaborative. We have state facilities. We're losing employees to private sector employees. The good news is we've got more people, like Amazon coming in. They got like 3,000 or so jobs at the old Chrysler plant, where they're taking the old GM plant. They're taking some of our employees from the Ferris complex because they're paying as much or more. And it's a job that doesn't involve some of the difficulties as an employee at Ferris. And we're seeing that in our long-term care facilities. And so it's an issue, John, Mr. Scrobot, across the board, and teacher compensation has got. That are English learners and from low income backgrounds, and that's a commitment as well for all the schools across the state. And there are a lot.
From what I'm reading in 10.8, this is the Brandywine School District commits through this MOU. We're committing to and with a board vote to withdraw, and we agree to the MOU, this board is committing to being a part of Wilmington Learning Collaborative until 2026.
So I think the provision says that the goals that there is that clause in there.
So there is, if the goals are being met, the board may not vote to remove the district. from the collaborative.
Right. It's a 5-year commitment, 4-year planning year in 4 years.
Thank you.
Into the same day, that whereas the proposal here does address that through the extended time to do enrichment and do academic academic enrichment as well as other enrichment.
Yeah, so I think Dr. Holiday addressed that a little bit earlier. I think it really is incumbent upon us to fill in that extra time, particularly extended day, with community organizations, Boys and Girls Clubs, the PAL, North Market Street. There's lots of I don't think we do as good a job as we could to connect those after-school programs with the learning needs of the individual students. I just had a conversation a couple of days ago with an employee at the PAL about just that question. What do you know about the needs of the children that come in here every afternoon? Not very much. And I know that there are confidentiality issues that have to be addressed there, but I really believe that we can do a better job, at Edgemore, at PAL, at YMCA, all those kinds of programs. Our Family Services Cabinet Council is running an assessment of the capacity of those community service organizations to deliver services for the children in our schools on an after-school base, after hours basis for school. We don't, I think, as Mark said earlier, the teachers, some want to do it and we encourage them to do. Most are burned out by the challenges of the day. And that's one of the biggest, frankly, challenges of the collaborative, which is to attract good teachers and to keep them, more importantly, to keep them beyond, what did our data say, 3 to 5 years, and they're gone. And that's just, I remember visiting one of the Christina suburban schools. Most of the teachers that were there have been there 10 to 15 years, and they actually started in the schools in the city and were there 3 to 5 years and gone. Well, there's a reason for that: more stress, more distraction, not extra resources to deal with that. These are things that we hear from the teachers, from parents, from everybody in this. And it's not a secret or a surprise. And those are the kinds of things that we've got to address.
Governor and Secretary Holiday, and certainly want to thank Mr. Sheehan, just like everyone else has said. He has spent a lot of hours organizing the practices in place, but that is this is great, John, again, or the team. I think you've done a phenomenal job of taking the information, but what I hear from our educators, building leaders, they just want the resources.
Well, that is certainly the way opportunity funding comes to the districts. They can determine, they can even use it for preschool and early education. Better than I. Obviously your local funds, there's quite a bit of flexibility around how.
Why is there a need for this? Why is there a need for a Wilmington collaborative setup? Why not just grant the autonomy and allow the building supervisors to manage their funding as they?
You mean, why is there a collaborative beyond just the Brandywine School Board, the Red Clay School Board, and the Christie? Yeah, I think it's a capacity issue. I think we have a geographic area with specific identifiable population and needs that are frankly a result of a tortured history of segregation, and then the whole deseg process, which has not served city schools and families as well as we would have liked, in my view. And so this is an opportunity to address the unique needs in a more collaborative way. It also, we have the Reading Commission. It hasn't been mentioned or talked about. One of the things that the Reading Commission is looking at is just the configuration of the school districts within the city of Wilmington. We happen to believe that whatever they would decide there, that the Wilmington Learning Collaborative will accommodate positive movement, progress, regardless of what they decide to do. Yeah.
Reverend Perry, in the MOU meetings, I've listened very closely to you and your counterparts who represent the city in Red Clay and Christina. Board members, along with your superintendents and some key identified individuals who really want to advocate specifically for the city of Wilmington. I've said in other meetings, I think the governance board your colleagues in those other two districts. I think that is an element of this that is much different than anything we've tried to do in the past, and good for us finally to recognize that the city of Wilmington deserves its voice.
Thank you.
I think we've reached the end of our comments and questions. So Governor, thank you. Secretary Holiday, thank you. Mr. Sheehan, thank you. Appreciate your time coming out, taking our questions, providing us with the update. And I'm sure members of the board, may forward some additional comments or questions regarding the draft before we reconvene in July.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Holler, thank you to all the members of the board. And if you have really detailed questions, I would recommend that you text or call John Sheehan. I can tell you that he'll return your call within minutes. And if he doesn't, you can report him to me.
Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Great, thank you. So do we need to take a recess here to figure out, I guess whenever that thing glitches, the audio, it cuts the audio. Do we know? Okay. Do we need to reboot, reset the Wi-Fi or something? Would that mess up the whole stream? Okay. Our apologies to our Zoom audience for the audio glitches. I guess that'll affect the ultimate recording of the, all right. Next up, Mr. Holler, we have our Bsd Hero Award.
Just one question first. Is there a live recording in progress right now? Are we good?
Should be.
Okay. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we have a hero among us. And at this time, I'm going to ask Lisa Rockford, who is the supervisor of our custodial team in the Brandywine School District, to come forward to the podium. And is Christine Snyder in the audience this evening? Lisa is going to represent BSD and the family of Sharon Snyder. You heard at the beginning of the meeting that sadly, on April 14th, a beloved team member at Claymont Elementary School suffered a cardiac arrest while on presence in the building. You often wonder how you'll react when that moment hits. Many of us, thanks to the efforts of Jason Heller, many of the team members in Brandywine School District are CPR certified. And just because you bear that certification and you believe you're ready to act when the need comes, you never know how you really will react. And I'd like to ask Dean of Students at Claymont Elementary School, Mr. Ed Burks, to come forward to the podium. Fortunately, at the moment of need, there was a school play going on that night. And in the capacity of one of the administrators on the team, Mr. Burks was present. And when the need arose, he did not hesitate. He followed his training. He grabbed the AED and without hesitation began life-saving CPR on Sharon. Nine 911 event at Claymont. When I got there, Ed was in full swing providing CPR. He continued that until the EMS crew arrived. And in the words of an onlooker, he did bring Sharon back because of his efforts. Sadly, Sharon passed away later that evening, but Ed, on behalf of the entire Brandywine School District, I want to thank you for being one of the rare few who, in the moment, doesn't hesitate, reacts, and does the unselfish commitment to do whatever it takes to save another. And Ed, you exemplify the best of what Brandywine has to offer. And I want to say thank you. Christine was hoping that she could be here tonight. She is actually the daughter of Sharon. We've attended a beautiful memorial that the family had over the weekend for Sharon. And the family asked that we present you with a token of their appreciation. And Lisa, if you could provide that to Ed on behalf of the family. And Lisa, I'll give you the certificate to give to Ed on behalf of the district. Ed, thank you for being a hero.
To make sure they knew that they were certainly welcome to leave or stay, but I wanted to extend that opportunity. Next up, we have our CTE Patient Care Assistant Pathway and BSD Lifesavers presented by Dr. Kutch, Dr. Lawson, Dr. McKinney, and Ms. Beth Matty.
Good evening, and good evening, President Scrobot and Vice President Pigeon and members of the board and Mr. Holler. I want to tell you a little story about what we're about to show you this evening. About 3 years ago, right before COVID, the new nurse, she was new at the time at PS DuPont, Rochelle Lawson, and I were talking about the need to encourage more students to pursue a career in nursing. Mrs. Lawson shared that she was talking with some of her students in the nursing office, and they liked to think about nursing, but they didn't think that that was really in their future. They didn't know how to do it, where to go, where they could go, where could they get money. They just didn't think that that was something that was possible for them. And Mrs. Lawson was concerned that here were these kids in middle school putting limits on what was possible for them. So we talked about it and we thought, well, maybe we could do something for them, introduce them to the pathways that they could take for nursing. Well, then COVID happened and we kind of had to put a stop on it. But in this past summer, when we were going to return to in-school learning, we thought, okay, let's try this again. And we partnered with the Delaware Nurses Action Coalition and applied for funding to launch a program for 7th and 8th grade students in all 3 of our middle schools. In October, we learned we were one of the 6 nurse-led organizations in the country to receive the Future of Nursing Innovation Fund grant, which focuses on nurses' role in building health equity. The Brandywine School District is the first organization in Delaware to be honored with this award as well. The Innovation Fund is funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and AARP, but as a condition of the award, we needed to secure matching funds from community partners, which the University of Delaware School of Nursing and the Brandywine School District. Our goal was to increase awareness of nursing career pathways, specifically for students from racially and ethnically diverse backgrounds and males. These are populations that are not well represented in nursing. And in order to address health equity and to improve access to health care, we need nurses who represent the communities they serve. The Bsd Lifesavers program was led by a dynamic team of nurses, dedicated school nurses, Rochelle Lawson, James Grant, Jackie Kimball, Michelle Scott, Tracy Seth, and Sheila Pickering. And now let us share the story of our students' journey through our video.
All right, here we go. Ready?
Okay.
Yep.
I want to be a part of the Bsd Lifesavers program for a few different reasons. I want to take care of my friends and family when I get older, especially my mom. She's taken care of me for all of my life, and so one day I hope to return the favor.
You lock your elbows to keep it straight, and then you have to push at a rate of 100 to 120 compressions per minute with at least a depth of 2 inches. So
We're really interested in promoting diversity in nursing. 80% of the nurses are female and white. We really wanted to encourage our students of color and young men, young boys to think about a career in nursing. And that's what we really were striving to do. You know, we had students write an essay to apply why they wanted to be in the program. And then we asked parents to write an essay why they thought their child would be good at this program. And then we asked them to get a recommendation from another staff member and why they would be good at this program, which really showed their level of commitment and to the program. And that's what really we were looking for.
This program would show me the ways nurses do their jobs and teach me ways to be one too. My parents are both in the healthcare profession, and I love listening to their stories about helping others. With my parents being healthcare workers, they show me why I'm still so inspired by nurses, doctors, and healthcare professionals.
Do you tie the tourniquet here or here?
I probably had 30 applicants and we had to choose 10 from that. So I didn't think we would get 10, truly. I didn't think we would get the interest of 10. And, we had a good, I had 2 males in my program, which I didn't think I would get any males in my program. So we had our team together with, a total of 7 nurses. So, we got them on board. We have Christiana Care now, we have Del Tech, we have UD, and we have transportation, nutritional was put into place to feed the students at the end of the day. And now we're ready to go.
watch the second hand. So go ahead and count for 30 seconds. And then we'll multiply it up by 2.
You really do need to expose students younger than just high school. And so the middle school is a great spot to be able to bring them together with nursing students and see what nurses do. Is this a career option? That's something that you'd be interested in. So it was a real great marriage of us to pull together our resources and see what we can do. And so when Beth approached me and said, well, we can offer the simulation.
So we were supposed to hear the first tape at 1:20.
The students were really concentrating on what it was that they were doing and really focusing. That's when it was like, wow, look at that. They really are getting this.
This is a great opportunity to show what my future job could be and just how things operate in a hospital or a nurse office. An opportunity like this program hasn't come to me like this before, so I'm very excited and interested in being a Bsd lifesaver.
And then we'll count 1, 2, 3.
the Christiana Care, we were able to have the students view presentations from the floor. So we had the OR, we had the emergency room, we had mother baby, we had the ICU, the IV team. So all of those students were able to see what those nurses do within their field.
We have an opportunity, we have the ability to reach more kids and expose them to the whole career trajectory. It's a calling, but sometimes they need to be exposed to it in order to hear that voice in their head that it's really an important field to be in.
I would like to be in the Bsd Lifesavers program because I've always been interested in learning about medical health. I myself have health issues and have been in the hospital a lot. I think this program would be really good for me to see what it is like and learn more about being a doctor or nurse.
The last week, we wanted to bring everything together. And so the University of Delaware team planned a mock disaster, which brought all their skills into play. So the students were called to this disaster and they had to take over their roles using what they knew.
We did not even realize what we were stepping into with this. We didn't realize how big or how much could grow, how much could involve. We were like, oh my God, this is just the tip of the iceberg here. Not only does it give the Brandywine School District the opportunity to have that pipeline, streamline them into the nursing profession, but it gives our student body a chance to get engaged and active with the community, give back to the younger generation, pass on what they learned.
Field is a model that we are looking at. Middle schoolers who will consider nursing is what will make a difference in addressing health equity and advancing health equity in our communities.
I can't imagine what a nurse goes through seeing people hurt every day, but I can't imagine that helping people who need it is very fulfilling. And I want to know
Wonderful photography and putting that together. So 29 7th and 8th grade students from our 3 middle schools completed the program. Our high school nurses now plan to expand the after-school program into 9th and 10th grade so we can continue to connect students with opportunities available in nursing. Now, Dr. Yolanda McKinney will share information on the additional pathways for our students in the Brandywine School District.
So in November of 2021, the Brandywine School District, in partnership with Delaware Technical and Community College, began the Patient Care Technician Pathway. This program includes our current 11th grade students who will continue in their 12th grade year while bringing on a new cohort of 11th graders. BSD transportation is provided to those students, and the coursework occurs at the Del Tech Wilmington campus during the school day. In order to qualify, students must be in 11th grade. They must pass the AccuPlacer reading assessment. They must pass a criminal background check and drug screening. They must be fully committed to acquiring highly sought after industry certifications and gaining full-time employment. Students that participate in the Patient Care Assistant Program complete 600 hours of training over this 2-year period. They have 180 hours of CNA training, 200 hours of phlebotomy technician training, and 220 hours of patient care technician training. So now we're going to give you an opportunity to hear from some of our first cohort of students.
I've always said I was going to be a nurse. Like that was always like in my, in my mindset. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to be a nurse. So when they called us down, I just took this as an opportunity.
I decided to join it because I want to be in the medical field when I go to college, and I wanted to gain confidence in myself that I could do it so that I could be ahead of other people and just have more knowledge.
I have a desire to be in the medical field. I want to be an anesthesiologist, and I felt it would put me one step further in my destiny to be an anesthesiologist.
I honestly feel like it was a good opportunity because like if people want to be like in the medical field, there's like a head start for them. So, you know, to just get like the basic skills and like, you know, just to like make you feel more confident.
I loved it. I enjoyed it. My labs were my favorite part of the whole program, but like getting to do labs on the mannequins, and even with the people in our group I got to do labs with, and it was very fun.
Just getting closer with the girls and the connections you make with the team.
I can't wait to do phlebotomy. Like, that's my favorite part. Like, you know.
Phlebotomy. I don't know much about it, but from what people say, it sounds fun.
I just want to do phlebotomy. Like, I think that'll be more, like, I think I'll enjoy that more, you know? Because, like, phlebotomy is, like, a really good subject and a good job to have. And, like, you're young and stuff. So it's, like, that's like, if you see it from the outside, like, that's you achieving a lot of stuff, you know? At the very end, you're certified CNA. And phlebotomy, that's, like, a really good, like, accomplishment, you know?
When I went in, I was very like confident on what I wanted to do, but being in there made me more confident on what I wanted to do and made me have a better understanding of what I wanted to do.
I really just wanted to do this so that I could get more self-confidence to know that I can do what I put my mind to, and just so that I know more for
No matter if you're a boy or a girl, everyone should try it, you know?
Phlebotomy, who knew? So with the patient care technician pathway, so many benefits for our students and some of the things that you were hearing about, but just want to point out a few things, what our students walk away with as a result of participating in this program. So after that 600 hours of studying and lab work, they'll earn certificate for CPR, certified nurse assistant, phlebotomy technician, and a patient care technician. Students who successfully complete the patient care assistant program of study with an 80% or better will receive articulated credit at Del Tech Community College for the following courses. Bio 110, Essentials of Anatomy and Physiology, that's 3 credits. Medical lab procedures for 3 credits. And nurse assistant training for 6 credits. That's at the high school level before they would even go to anything post-secondary. Walking right out of high school, they could get hired as a nurse assistant, a medical assistant, a phlebotomy technician, a healthcare technician, and looking at those starting salaries, they could be upwards $20 an hour right out of the gate. They could also be hired as an orderly. I looked that one up, $54,000 starting salary, and a home aide. They can continue their education post-secondary as a nurse, doctor, physician assistant, or any medical field position. And many of the allied health programs offered at Del Tech have connected degree programs with colleges and universities, including Del State, Immaculata University, Salisbury, University of Delaware, Wesley, Widener, and Wilmington University. So even if they chose not to go to Del Tech, they can still use those credits in the other universities. With Lifesavers expanding now from middle school to high school for 9th and 10th grade, we'll have a strong and diverse pipeline for 11th and 12th for a patient care technician, but also starting early in their high school career with our biomedical and science pathways. So amazing, amazing opportunities for our students as a result of this articulated program.
So in totality, we're extremely excited that we took two initiatives. We're putting them together, making sure that this group of 8th graders who are going to 9th grade, that we talk to them about how important integrated science is, and then the following year, how important biology is. Because if you remember, the pathway begins in 11th grade. So we're looking to make these connections, start it very early in middle school, and make sure that all of our students have an equitable, equal opportunity to be in a field, but also to go after those kinds of students that aren't in the field typically, as part of our just overall equity initiative. So thank you. Are there any questions about the program?
Is this just particularly at Concord or?
No, this is for all three middle schools was the BSD Lifesavers program, and they will matriculate into our high schools, and all three high schools are offering the patient care technician pathway as well.
And could a student here at Brandywine do that in conjunction with a biomed pathway? Or is there overlap or conflicts?
The only thing would be in the 11th grade year, any conflicts, it could be with their scheduling, just because they are required to do a certain number of hours of lab work. So they could, but it might be challenging with the coursework that they have to do and put in.
Okay. And all of our guidance counselors would be advised of those conflicts in advising students who are conflicted or want to do one or the other.
Absolutely. In fact, our guidance counselors have been with us every step of the way with this.
Great. I think the hands-on experience that we saw in the video, I think the kids will remember that for a long time.
Our University of Delaware partners assured us they could up the ante next year with the same group and make the disaster situations even more exciting for them.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lead us into superintendent's report, Mr. Holler.
Our last board meeting took place on May 2nd, and since then, there's been many weeks filled with great events and accomplishments that I'm happy to share with you tonight. I want to start by acknowledging our 2023 Brandywine School District Teacher of the Year, Uche Amadupwe, from Concord High School. Every year, each school in our district names a Teacher of the Year. Then a special selection committee looks at each nomination for each individual building Teacher of the Year to select our district Teacher of the Year. Miss Amadupe will now be entered into the statewide competition, where a statewide panel will select the overall Delaware Teacher of the Year. Brandywine School District has been home to many Delaware Teachers of the Year throughout the years, including just last year, when Brandywine High School's Joshua Tabron earned the prestigious award. We also have another award to celebrate tonight, again from Concord High School. Please join me in congratulating Tim Hammer, Delaware Driver and Safety Education Association. Throughout the district, our students and their schools have been celebrating various end-of-the-year school celebrations. Many of our kindergarten classes participated in special move-up or graduation ceremonies to signify their transition into we have celebrations at Forwood, Hamby, and Springer Middle School. The bottom left corner, we captured a new tradition. This year, some of the team members from Tally Middle School visited some of the elementary schools at dismissal with special signs welcoming some of the rising fifth graders to Tally next year. It was an extra special way to make sure the rising sixth graders feel ready and welcomed at their new middle school homes. We were also able to visit the SITE program for their year-end celebration. SITE has a On Sunday, June 5th, all three Brandywine School District high schools once again returned to the Bob Carpenter Center in Newark for their individual high school graduation ceremonies. In incredible for our high schools to once again hold a traditional in-person graduation for their senior class. All three ceremonies showcased all the incredible work that the graduating seniors have accomplished and all the wonderful things ahead in their futures. We created a special video highlighting the day. Hope you enjoy.
Let me tell you that I love you, and I think about you all the time. Caledonia, you're calling me, now I'm going home.
When thinking of the Brandywine High School class of 2022, the first word that comes to mind is change. Everyone's lives change obviously over the course of 4 years, but what I think makes us special is the change that isn't so obvious, the change that we have brought about and the change that we will bring.
Our experiences at Mount have allowed each of us to grow academically, but also, and perhaps more importantly, taught us what it means to be a productive member of a caring community. As graduates, we're often reminded that we are the future. I truly believe that we will each make the future brighter. I'm so proud to graduate among all of you.
Let me tell you that I love you, and I think about you all the time. Caledonia, you're calling me, now I'm going home. But if I should become a stranger, know that it will make me more than sad. Caledonia's been everything I've ever had.
We have to believe in our ability to succeed. The truth is, success is all about our mindset, hard work, and dedication to the goal we want to reach. So let's leave today and start something new and have faith in the magic of new beginnings. It's up to you on what direction you want your life to take. Today, we close the door to our past and open the door to our future. Today, we begin the new chapter of our lives. Everyone's path will be different moving forward, but together, we will always be Bsd High.
Let me tell you that I love you, and I think about you all the time. Caledonia, you're calling me, now I'm going home. But if I should become a stranger, know that it will make me more than sad. Caledonia's been everything
Needless to say, the graduates from all three high schools are incredibly impressive. Collectively, the BSD students earned an astounding $29.5 million in scholarships. BSD graduates will be attending colleges and universities such as American, Drexel, Fordham, MIT, RIT, Swarthmore, and Villanova, just to name a few. We are so proud of these students and what they've achieved. Many of our senior class members, as well as other student leaders at our three high schools, recently collaborated with their school leadership to conduct coordinated student walkout events to bring attention to gun violence throughout the country. The student leaders were inspired to hold these symbolic events following the tragic events in Uvalde, Texas on May 24th. The student leaders worked with building administrators to hold events to honor the lives of those lost in Texas. The events at all three schools even earned media attention from many local outlets who spotlighted how the students were using their voice to inspire change. As you likely have seen on social media channels and district website, there's been a lot of activities and events throughout our district as we reach the end of the school year. As always, remember this is merely a snapshot of what's taken place. Many of our schools, including Tally, pictured here, held spring performing arts concerts. Forward Elementary recently held their Special Olympics Delaware spring event. Hamby Elementary held a community event to celebrate their 10-year anniversary. Claymont Elementary continued their tradition of having middle school students in the Spanish immersion program read to elementary students in the program. From Pause for People. Additional recent events included a special visit from the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz, who traveled all the way from UCLA to visit the Brandywine School District and our three high schools. Each high school visit included a special performance for all students. Following those concerts, the student performers then took part in breakout sessions with our high school musicians for peer-to-peer learning opportunities. Other events included a Memorial Day ceremony where JROTC cadets at Mount Pleasant High School honored the service and sacrifice of our fallen service men and women. Design Day, which is the culminating event for students in the design and engineering pathway. After 3 years of courses, students in the pathway have a final course that requires them to engage with real-world community clients to help solve authentic problems. We also had a special performance by Forward Elementary School students at a Blue Rocks game. In addition to a pre-recorded piece that was played during the game, the students also performed live before the first pitch and even got to high-five many of the players. And we have more recent events to share. You may recall that board member Jason Heller was not in attendance at our last board meeting as he was in Dallas. We are incredibly proud of all the BSD students who competed, both with the Brandywine Bots and the Mount Pleasant High School JROTC robotics program. And we have to give a special shout out to the JROTC robotics program who earned an invitation to the world competition in their rookie season and won the Build Award while they were there. And finally, in mathematics, we also want to celebrate students from P.S. DuPont Middle School who are pictured on the right. Just a few months ago, 25 students from P.S. DuPont participated in the national AMC 8 competition with over 66,000 other students from the US. In addition to competing in that national competition, 12 students from PS were invited to participate in the state Math Counts competition with 40 other students from across the state. Ready for the results? PS had 5 students place in the top 10. It's an amazing accomplishment. Again, this is just a snapshot of the amazing things that our students and staff are doing throughout the district. Meanwhile, Brandywine School District summer programming will begin in just a few short weeks. This summer, we'll have students participating in programs, academies, and even summer camps. We're very excited to once again have the robust summer programming in place for our students. Those who will be participating have already heard from their individual schools. As mentioned, we're very excited for the return of our summer camps, including STEM camps and fine arts camps. And we look forward to showcasing the great things that our students are doing at those camps at a future board meeting. BSD is once again providing the summer meals program for families. I'll be sending an email to all families tomorrow with a few end-of-year reminders, which will include information about report cards getting mailed home. In addition, I'll also share information about this year's summer meals program. The information can also be found on our district website right on the homepage. This year, families who want to participate will need to bring their students to designated schools where students will need to eat their meals on site. That is now a federal requirement. The full list of schools and times for those meals is on our website. Additionally, the Brandywine food bus will be visiting communities again this summer. This is another great resource for our community. The schedule for the Brandywine food bus is also on our district website. Brandywine School District will once again partner with Chesapeake Regional Pharmacy for another COVID-19 vaccination clinic at our schools earlier this month. These clinics have provided an opportunity for students and their families to receive vaccinations. I'd like to thank Chesapeake Regional Pharmacy as well as the school health coordinator, Ms. Beth Matty, for their collaboration to provide these services to our community. We look forward to future clinics over the summer and fall. We'll make sure to communicate any future clinics on our social media channels and website. Finally, an attendance achievement so impressive I had to share. This year, 28 of our 120 school custodians had perfect attendance. As you know, our school custodians do an incredible job both day and night to keep our school buildings clean and ready for students. And in a year filled with absences due to pandemics, they didn't miss a beat. I want to thank these team members for all of their hard work and dedication this year. It is an impressive feat to have that many team members with perfect attendance. Mr. Scrobot, members of the board, that concludes my report. And just another reason to state, proud to be BSD.
Thank you, Mr. Holler. Any comments from the board on the superintendent report? Nope. Hearing none, we will move into public comment. This is our time, as always. We ask that our speakers and audience members be courteous and respectful to each other. This is your time to
showing as an attendee online. Is he present in the building? Yes? Okay, you can come on down to the microphone.
If speakers come down to the either aisle has a microphone. And how many additional? 4, okay.
On deck, we'd like to have Christine Woodruff, please.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight as the parent of 3 rising seniors at Brandywine High School. I wanted to talk a little bit about the experience that we've had at Brandywine as a family, and a lot of our reason for sending our kids to Brandywine High School was because of the leadership that Mr. Rolfe provided in stabilizing Brandywine in the years prior to my kids entering 9th grade. The conversations that we had with him the year before we made that choice made us feel very comfortable about the environment that he and his team had created at Brandywine. And I mentioned team, and because Mr. Rolfe would tell you himself, he didn't do this alone. But I think the success that Brandywine has had in the last 7 years is a testament to his leadership. And we've appreciated not only his availability, but his ability to make a connection with the kids. With all three of my kids have had good experiences, and in particular have been able to form a relationship with Mr. Rolfe. Maybe it's just saying hello in the hallways, but also on occasion noticing that maybe they're not having a good day and asking, how they're doing, and taking the time to listen to the answer and providing some really good guidance. And so it was shocking to know that to hear of his reassignment, especially because we're not really sure what problem is trying to be addressed here. So I think understanding that personnel matters are confidential. I think the parents of students at Brandywine High School would like to understand better what data was used to make the decision, how principals are evaluated, and what you're going to do to make sure there's an orderly transition, and also to respectfully reconsider the decision, and ask yourself if you're really curing the disease, or if there's a different problem that really needs to be addressed that isn't going to be addressed with moving him to another school. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bear.
Christine Woodruff with Pamela Bargren on deck, please.
Superintendent Holler and members of the board. My name is Christine Woodruff, and I am the outgoing president of the Brandywine High School PTO. And in saying that, the following comments are my own personal opinion, and they are not representative necessarily of the board or the members of the PTO. I'm here to ask the board to review the transfer of Mr. Rolfe. I think everyone agreed that a parent involvement has a huge impact on the success of a school. Mr. Rolfe has always been supportive of the PTO, and the fact that Brandywine even has a PTO and the other two high schools don't is an example of this. Mr. Rolfe attends our monthly PTO meetings and provides updates on what is going on Brandywine. He has always been open to questions and concerns from parents and provide explanations when able. I feel the main reason parents attend our meetings is to hear Mr. Rolfe's principal report. There are many factors contributing to Brandywine's success in recent years, and Mr. Rolfe's commitment to the school and relationship with parents are just two. As an involved parent, this announcement was a complete surprise and raises a question of why. The district often uses data to support decisions. What data supports this decision? Brandywine is succeeding and growing. I request the board to review the factors that behind the superintendent's decisions and if they are just. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Woodruff.
Pamela Bargren, and we will have Deb McGill on deck, please.
Good evening. My name is Pam Bargren, and I thank you, board and superintendent, for taking comments today. I too am speaking with regard to Principal Rolfe's reassignment. I too was shocked to hear of the news of his reassignment to a different school. I have a 10th grader currently here at Brandywine. For the last 2 years, from what I have seen in our experiences, he has been an outstanding principal. We've seen just a wonderful school experience for my 10th grader. She had to start her year on Zoom, and it was a bad situation, but I know that the school worked hard and the district worked hard to get them into the school. And then fast forward to this year, it has been a great experience for her to be able to be in class. He has worked hard to build an amazing staff. You can tell by my daughter's experience with her teachers. I was blessed and honored to be able to coach the JV softball here. This is our first time that they've had a JV team in many years. And he came out that first week and I could just feel his support for our team, making sure that our girls got more than what they'd have in a long time. We received a batting cage, a scoreboard, and just felt the love and support that he had for our team and to ensure that his students got a chance to play softball. So I ask you too to reconsider having him reassigned.
Hi, I'm here tonight to add my voice to those who are disappointed and dismayed to find that Mr. Rolfe has been reassigned from Brandywine High School. When I first moved to Wilmington almost 30 years ago, Brandywine was the high school to go to. Over the years, as I monitored the changing landscape of the schools in the district, it became obvious that Brandywine had become the place not to go. As we got closer to having children approaching high school age, I started to hear murmurs that things might turn around at Brandywine. So we gave it a chance and added it to the high school open house tour for our older son. We were impressed with the event, the teachers and staff that we met, and the feel of the school. After we made the decision to choice into Brandywine and got more involved in the school community, it became obvious that the feel, that intangible something you get when you walk in the door, started with Mr. Rolfe. That's not to say that there are not many wonderful, dedicated, engaged teachers, staff, and administrators here, but he brings a vision and an expectation for how and what the Brandywine family should be. In the 5 years since we have been part of this school, we've witnessed the continued academic and extracurricular growth and revival of Brandywine and are a proud Bulldog family. My students have found him receptive to student feedback and believe he always has the students' best interests in mind. As a parent, I found him to be dedicated, loyal, and most importantly, present and committed to students and bringing Brandywine back to what it used to be. He is approachable and willing to listen, and even if we haven't always agreed, I always felt he heard and always felt that he was devoted to the students and the school. In closing, I'd like to ask the district administrators and the board to reconsider this decision, which does not make me BSD proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGill.
Tracy Lake.
I'm the parent of a Brandywine High School graduate, a current Brandywine High School student, and an upcoming Brandywine High School student. We are Delaware transplants, and in navigating the zoning versus choice options, we heard horror stories about Brandywine High School when we first arrived. We ultimately chose to stay within our feeder and send our kids to Brandywine after meeting Mr. Rolfe. Want to take away from the staff. We don't. We are recently informed of his impending involuntary transfer and wanted it to be noted that we think Brandywine High School will be negatively impacted by that decision. His efforts have turned this school around in the few years that we have been here to see it. And it's created an environment in which students want to come here. They're actively choosing to come to this school, and they are proud to say that they are part of Brandywine High School. They show up at the games, they cheer for their students, they come to the dances. They are proud to be here at this school. If you take just a minute to listen to your students, there's now rumblings of kids wanting to leave because Mr. Rolfe is being moved. That's pretty sad. Please provide us the data. Please provide us the transparency as parents to know what is going on at our school. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lake.
That concludes public comment.
Thank you, Ms. Karpinski. Appreciate everyone's comments. I know in the beginning we said we can't discuss personnel issues. And I wish there was more that you can we could share. I myself have a graduate at Brandywine High School. I have a sophomore here as well, and not sure what else we can say to that, but I appreciate your comments and I thank you all for coming out for that. Moving on to board business, board member liaison reports. Delaware School Boards Association Executive Board, Mr. Ackerman.
The executive board met last Wednesday. I was unable to attend that meeting, but was reelected as the association president for the upcoming school year.
Congratulations. Delaware School Boards Association, do you have a next meeting date?
The next meeting date is August 13th. It is the annual meeting and picnic at the Marinucci Farm in Harrington.
Great. Ms. Gordon is not with us this evening. I believe she emailed everyone a legislative update. If you don't have that, I'll make sure that she forwards that. District Finance Committee met last Wednesday, which was the 8th. Dr. Hale will cover all of the items we talked about: monthly financial reports, tax rate proposal, salary recommendations for the fiscal year, and the preliminary budget. We also had in attendance gentleman recommended as a new member. We've had some attrition over the last year or two, looking to increase that membership, and he attended his first meeting and will give consideration. And if so, we'll come before the board with a recommendation for new member. Maintenance Advisory Committee, Mr. Heller.
I wasn't able to make the May 10th meeting. I don't know if you were, Mr. Scrubbat.
May 10th. I believe that was the one at Tally. We'll circle back to that one. I don't have an update at the moment, but I believe that was at Tally Middle School and I was there. Parent Council for Students with Disabilities, Ms. Pigeon.
So the last meeting for the year was on May 18th, and I don't have an update on the meeting.
Parents and Citizens Advisory Committee, Reverend Perry.
As previously reported, the Parents and Citizens Advisory Committee has recessed until the fall. And at that time, we will regroup with the committee members.
Thank you. Ms. Karpinski, could you just make a note to kind of put a little pause note on that until September for the next agenda? Health Advisory Committee, Mr. Heller.
There hasn't been a meeting since our last meeting.
91.7 WMPH Committee has not had a meeting, but I did have a couple updates of some ongoing activities. Looks like the radio station will host site interns from BSD once again this summer. They will have some summer programming and working with students from the site program who express an interest. Will come to the radio station a couple mornings each week, learn to host some music, write some PSAs, build a music program, and do some potential interviews. WMPH often broadcasts sports throughout the fall and winter. This year, they broadcast some baseball games, which is a sport that lends itself to be well suited for radio. They were scheduled to broadcast a game from Frawley Stadium with Brandywine versus Mount Pleasant, but unfortunately that game was rained out on May 13th. And that is it for the moment for WMPH. Our next meeting, I do not have a date for that as well. Educator Recruitment and Retention, Ms. Stock.
Yes, members of the Education Recruitment and Retention Committee have agreed to meet this summer to plan a presentation for the board, since this is a board committee, And so I do not have a date for the next meeting though for that, but that will be coming. And thank you to the district and to the board for continuing to support recruitment and retention efforts for our educators.
Thank you, Ms. Stock. Reverend Perry, anything to add to the Wilmington Learning Collaborative discussion?
No, other than I would ask the district to host our own town hall to get feedback from our educators and our community so that we can, again, I think I've said it, I think I said it last month, I'm not sure, but I think the governor has done his due diligence in hosting, but likewise, we should also do the same.
Would you be looking for that between now and prior to the next board meeting?
Absolutely.
Okay. I guess work with the superintendent and Stacy to see if we can get a date on the calendar ASAP, advertise it accordingly. Any additional board member reports?
I had a question for Reverend Perry about the Parent and Citizens Advisory Committee. I had somebody recently asked how to join or express an interest. Is that going to be decided as the group regroups?
So generally, we take the recommendations of principals and the superintendent from, so the parents, or excuse me, the principals recommend parents from the respective schools, but we're always open, and so they can contact me directly.
Thanks.
Right, hearing no other updates, that concludes board business. I will now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion, Mr. Ackerman, second, Mr. Heller. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Monthly personnel report as amended at the beginning of the meeting. Do I have a motion to accept item 7A, the monthly personnel report?
So moved.
I have a motion, Mr. Ackerman. Do I have a second? I don't believe the chair can second the motion. You know, vote on it, you can second it. I believe so.
I'll second the motion.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I recuse.
Ms. Karpinski, roll call, please.
Mr. Scrobot,
Yes.
Ms. Pigeon,
Recuse.
Mr. Ackerman,
Aye.
Mr. Heller,
Yes.
Reverend Perry,
Abstain.
Ms. Stock. And the interest for our students. Yes. That was a yes, Ms. Stock.
Yes.
That's 4 yeas, 1 abstain, and 1 recuse.
Motion carries. Item 7A, employee matter 22-14. Do you have a motion to accept the superintendent's recommendation?
I have a motion to accept the superintendent's recommendation.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Abstain.
Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Roll call, Ms. Karpinski.
Mr. Scrobot,
Yes.
Ms. Pigeon,
Yes.
Mr. Ackerman,
Yes.
Mr. Heller,
Abstain.
Reverend Perry,
Yes.
Ms. Stock.
Yes.
That is 5 yeas and 1 abstention.
Motion carries. As amended in the beginning, item 22-115 has been removed. Moving on to student matters, item 8A. Do I have a motion to accept the superintendent's recommendation for student matter 22-04?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Do I have a motion to accept the superintendent's recommendation for student matter 22-06?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Remainder of the items, student matters. If it pleases the board, will combine items C and D. Do I have a motion to accept student choice matters as discussed in executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Moving on to old business, we addressed 9A by moving that to the governor's presentation. 9B, an Esser update. Dr. Hale.
All right, thank you very much, members of the board. Superintendent Holer, I'm here tonight to provide you with an update on our Esser plan. We've been before you a few times to explain kind of where we are in the process, as well as when we go through our monthly report, we also show you on a monthly basis where we are on an expenditure basis. They wanted to go into a little bit more detail about the analysis that we're performing and kind of the steps that we're going to be taking moving forward. So as you all know from the original plan, Esser 2 and 3 funding, there's 15 categories of acceptable expenditures. So we're very careful when we go through the budgeting process and the grant application process to ensure that all of the expenditures that we make fall within these classifications. As you know, we have received roughly $36 million between Esser 2 and Esser 3. 11 million in Esser 2, as you can see, with roughly 25 million in Esser 3. Each of those have end dates that differ by 1 year. So the smaller amount, the 11.1 million, has an expiration of the 30th of November 2023, and Esser 3 has an expiration of 2024. So that would be one more additional year for Esser 2 and 2 years for Esser 3, which is consistent with our 3-year plan that we've been making. So there's really 2 ways that we go about doing the tracking for our Esser. There's the way that we have to do it within the e-grants program, which is how we track it through the Department of Ed. And then there's how we budget for it for our monthly reporting. So what you see here is the breakup of Esser 2, the 11.1 million, into the categories and how those budgeted categories are sitting. Now, I do want to make note that in the next several presentations, there's going to be one kind of outlier in here, and that's with our education technology. We are involved in the emergency connectivity program. That's where, if you recall, Patty Staker was here a few months ago talking about how we are involved in the program that's going to supply about 7,000 computers to the district, roughly about $2.6 million through this federal program that ultimately will not be at any cost to the district. The only catch to it was that the initial purchase had to be made through a purchase order. which encumbers funds in our system. Once those computers are received, the invoice is actually sent to the government agency that makes the payment, and we will release those funds back through. So we have made that encumbrance through Esser. So the balances, as we're going through these next several slides, through some of the technology, actually that number is a little bit of a misnomer. So we'll see that over the next several months, how that number changes. So again, as you see these are just like specific budget categories based on those 15 categories. So the 11.1 million is what you see here. And then again, the remaining, the 24.9 million in Esser 3, and how each of those categories. So that shaded area of the 2.7 million includes the 2.6 that I was just referring to. So essentially, look at it as that balance of 18.2 million is roughly about 20.8, and it will be once those funds have been reestablished through that program. So this is how it shows up in the e-grants program. What we have done and what you see on the monthly report is we use an operating code structure, which provides essentially budget managers. So each of these operating unit numbers that you see on the far left have a corresponding budget manager. And each of the cases that you see on this page, it's mostly it's principals. So the principals have a certain allocation of funding. And the reason I separated this is because the way that we're approaching is that the principals were provided with an allocation based on Esser 2 and Esser 3. We will not be making any revisions to those allocations. So as each of them are in a different period of where they're making their expenditures within their plan, there's still roughly $600,000 remaining that is under the control of the building principals. The remaining budget, as you can see here, is about $35 million. I would say that's non-building level budget areas. So, these would be things that would be more district controlled, salaries, the facilities expenditures and things. So what you're seeing here is, and this coincides with what we see on the monthly report, is the budgeted areas that have their own budget managers within the district. So what we plan on doing moving forward, actually, I'm sorry, I skipped one step. What I wanted to do is also show the categorical expenditures that we've made within each of the two, and kind of just to give you a rough idea as to what are some of the types of expenditures. Now, these are the description codes that are processed within the voucher system. So every expenditure that we make, we have to put certain coding in it so that it'll flow through the system. So all of these coincide with the expenditures that are taking place. You can see that there's a considerable number of instructional supplies that have been purchased over the last year. Now, again, as we continue to move forward, and certainly if there's any questions from the board as to, we can break this information down even further. We can get vendor information. So we have a lot of detailed information. I didn't want to put too much on you. But really what I wanted to show here is just kind of the categories and the types of expenditures. So the thing I wanted to note too is that with Esser 2 being 1 year earlier of an expiration, that there's roughly about $1 million remaining of the 11 million that we have 1 year to spend, which is great because, of the total 36, the way that we've been approaching it has been more so as a total. But we in the business office have been very particular to make sure that we're spending Esser 2 first, knowing that the expiration date is earlier. So the remaining funds, which is that $24 million or so, we have 2 years to spend. So what our next steps are moving forward is we'll be meeting with each of the budget managers to go over their individual areas and really going through their budgets and looking and having a conversation with them as to the items that they've purchased to date, and what if those things that have been budgeted for them moving forward still need to be purchased. There's a number of things within Esser that we know we are going to have to take a look at. For example, there's considerable funding within the grants for work stoppage. And we had that in there as a placeholder, not knowing at the time whether there could potentially be another work stoppage. So as we go through and meet with each of the budget managers, we'll make a determination as to whether the items that have not been purchased still need to be purchased. We'll then go through the process of which we've already done, is making sure that the positions that have been budgeted within Esser, that there's sufficient funding for those positions for the remaining 2 years. And basically what we will then do is look at what the balance is from there. And then that will then give us funds that we'll have the opportunity to reallocate potentially. So as we're going through and having those individualized meetings, again, there'll be a lot of detail that we'll be going through, and we'll certainly be coming back to the board and having conversations. But just as an example, we know that there's a considerable amount of facilities work that's going to continue to need to be made. And really the timing of that facilities work is important. So as we look at instructional materials, technology, all of those types of items, things that we have worked within the grant, the outcomes and what we need over the next 2 years, certainly we have a different perspective now than we did 12 months ago. So we'll be taking that approach as we look at making the revisions moving forward with the remaining funds. And that's what I have for my update. If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to provide any.
Dr. Hale, I do actually
Yes.
have one question. So I think it's great that you're meeting with the budget managers. I do know that one of the stipulations with the Esser 2 and Esser 3 funding was to try to achieve some stakeholder feedback, which I thought I had remembered. I thought I had remembered that was going to be on the table. I'm just wondering, is that still going to be part of the plan? And if so, when is it going to be? How is it going to be? And how will we? I just heard some feedback about the last attempt for stakeholder feedback, that there wasn't, for whatever reason, I guess a lot of people did not know about it. And so perhaps this time we need to put more of an effort into getting that stakeholder feedback. So I'm just wondering if is that part of the plan? When is it? How is
No,
it?
certainly. I mean, one of the biggest things that we have is our district finance committee. I mean, that's our, so we certainly they'll be extensively involved in the process. I mean, we certainly look at surveys and things that we've done over the course of the last year. But certainly that's something, I mean, we can work through that, have those conversations with the board as to what would be the comfort level to which, how much or how that happens. We can certainly work through that, but I'd be curious to get some recommendations from the board as to what you feel would be the most appropriate way for us to do that.
Ms. Stock, is there a particular area, particular stakeholder group or area within those budget items you're looking to address?
I definitely think that the district finance committee is a great place to start. I'm not sure, even just thinking about the makeup of that particular committee, if that is representative of all stakeholders. I would think that would be, from my understanding, I thought that was part of our charge to try to achieve stakeholder feedback for Esser funding. So just trying, I was curious.
No, absolutely. I mean, certainly, we'll work through that, and I can get back with the board on that, on how we're going to proceed with that.
Yeah, so Ms. Stock, what we've said in the past was once Dr. Hale goes through that process that he just mentioned, and we identify what funds are believed not to be expended, we will come back. We will put out a parent and staff survey to solicit feedback. We also are kind of waiting a little bit to see what kind of financing comes in from the JFC. As an example, we've got quite a bit of funding designated toward safety and security. We know we've got projects that exceed that number. We are hopeful that the state legislators are going to come back with some additional safety and security funding. If that happens, then some of that money that was like what Dr. Hale was referencing as money left in reserve in case we had another shutdown, kind of undesignated. We were thinking that could go into safety and security. If we get the state funding, then there'll be some remaining pieces that we can look at in terms of other needs. But we do have to get stakeholder feedback.
Thank you.
Great. Any additional questions on the Esser update for Dr. Hale? Thank you, Dr. Hale.
right, thank
See
you.
you in a few minutes.
Yeah, right.
And I just want to thank Dr. Hale and Angie Thomas over on the side, because the Esser funding has been quite complicated, especially around the process that we chose. We chose not to put the majority of money into one or two buckets, but to spread the opportunity around those $36 million to all 15 buckets in some degree or fashion. And I just want to say thank you, Angie, Jason, for your diligence in helping with that effort.
Great. Moving on to new business. Dr. Lawson, we have a first read of the attendance policy.
Good evening, President Scrobot, Vice President Pigeon, members of the board, Superintendent Holer. A first read of the Brandywine School District's new attendance policy has been provided to each of you, along with a supplemental trifold that we are proposing be widely distributed among our students, staff, and families. The purpose of bringing a policy to you this evening is a result of several pieces of legislation that most of you are aware of that were recently passed by our Delaware legislators and outlined in Title 14, Section 615, School Attendance. A link for the full state policy is embedded in our policy, but I call your attention to the following sentence that begins the policy. Each school district and charter school shall have an attendance policy that complies with Title 14 and which defines and describes the district or charter's rules concerning attendance for students K to 12. Well, as you know, our rules for attendance are included in the Code of Conduct. So I have copied some of that information from our Code of Conduct into the attendance policy. But it also specifically states that we shall include information on how families and students may access supports and resources for student absences due to social, emotional, and behavioral wellness. So this was a big piece of some of that legislation. So as you will see in your packets, there is a trifold that we would like to display widely, which has it actually has district contact information for our lead psychologists, our lead counselors, and some of our lead mental health clinicians, but it also has local numbers, state numbers, and national hotlines as well for various needs that students may have throughout their K to 12 careers. So I look forward to returning next month to hear any comments you may have or any questions.
Quick question. Are you sure that's the right policy number? Because we have a 4.3 attendance policy for employees now. So would this actually have a different number?
This would be its own policy and it would sit in the students section because this
So
is.
it wouldn't be in section 4 because section 4 is personnel, right?
That's agreed. It is a student school
Okay.
attendance policy.
So we'll get it with a fresh number.
It will have a fresh number.
Okay, fair enough.
Dr. Lawson.
Yes.
So I know I've spoken with you in the past about tardies. I know, and we just approved the code of conduct of which that was in the tardy was in there. I just really want to emphasize that I think we need a more substantial policy for tardiness. And we call it out, we say what it is, but we don't have any consequences for tardiness. Even in this, it just explains what tardiness is. It doesn't explain a consequence for tardiness.
So a consequence for tardiness would be reflected in the code, right? Rather than this policy. This policy just asks us to ensure that our students have a means to be excused if there are social, emotional, and or behavioral challenges based on their overall wellness. We have seen a lot of challenges in our attendance as a whole, both with students and with staff through this pandemic. I certainly understand your concern about student tardiness because they are not accessing the resources that are available to them in school. So I do appreciate your feedback on that. However, it wouldn't be reflected in this policy.
Well, I just wonder because it does have the number of absences that are maximum number of absences to be considered mandatory attendance.
Yeah, that information is copied from our student code of conduct because the policy states that we have to then talk about what the rules are. And those are the rules in terms of how you're marked, whether you're marked absent or whether you're marked tardy, and then how many absences would put you in jeopardy of being able to pass the class for that particular year or your overall, passing of the grade. But I do think the consequences around tardiness should be taken up with the Code of Conduct Committee.
Thank you.
And Ms. Pigeon, you're talking about not only just tardiness for attendance of the school day, but for classes as well.
Correct.
Yeah. Any additional questions for this first read? Please be sure to email Dr. Lawson if you have any in the coming weeks.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Lawson. Back to Dr. Hale for monthly financial reports and so forth.
Don't worry, I only have an hour and 16 minutes of charge on my computer, so we should be all right. Oh, share my screen, sorry. Good evening. Due to the timing of the last board meeting, what we'll be looking at tonight is both the April and the May report. So I'm going to try to get that a little bit larger for you. Okay. So this is the information for April 30th that we reviewed with the District Finance Committee. This last quarter of the year, and you'll certainly see that in the May report, there is a lot of activity as we begin to close the system down. So you can see on this report that we received about 92% in total of our state funding. The key thing that we are certainly paying attention mostly to is our current tax receipts, which you can see on this, or maybe you can see better now, is 100%. So through April's report, through the end of April, we're actually about $8,000 short of receiving 100%. So I can tell you that without question that we're going to be well over 100% of our anticipated revenues. A couple of the other things that you begin to notice here, and you'll see this over the course of the next several reports, is that there are a couple areas where we have exceeded our projection in revenue pretty significantly. One being school transportation, another one being our child nutrition program. And really there's good reasons for both. One, if we look at our transportation expenditures, we have fuel adjustments, number of employees that we have annualized, homeless foster transportation. There's a lot of additional expenditures. So, it's been an interesting couple of years with COVID, but this was really a high expense year, but as you can see, we do receive a considerable amount of funding from the state for this. Now, as it relates to the child nutrition program, we've had a lot more participation this year, and with everybody being in school, one of the biggest profit generating things within a school nutrition program is what we call a la carte sales, and that would be other than the regular daily meal, kind of those additional purchased items, as well as after school snack programs but really the main reason for the increase in our child nutrition has to do with increased participation and the reimbursable amount that we receive from the federal government. And then, I would say that one thing that we are keeping a very close eye on for school nutrition has to do with the fact that the meal waiver is due to expire in June. We're not 100% sure of what's going to happen with that, but we're anticipating it going away, which basically brings back the need for meal benefit forms. So the last 2 years, we have not had to do any meal benefit forms. So that's something that the program and Colleen is doing a great job getting that information out and making sure that our parents are aware, because right now that means that all of our schools have been receiving free lunch. So we'll have to go back, and right now we're normally about 9 or 10 of our buildings, depending on the year, are our CEP schools. So moving along to our expenditures, our buildings, and you'll see that that $640,000 balance from the buildings is considerably lower in the next month's report. All of the budget managers are at this point, we're aggressively beginning to spend their budgets down. And again, you're going to see a considerable difference between this report and the May 31st report. I do want to bring your attention to this Esser 2-3 line. If you recall back when we did our preliminary budget, we essentially budgeted 1/3 of the total 36 million as just basically a guess as to there was not really any predetermined that we were going to split it evenly over 3 years. It was really more of trying to take a guess. And you'll see in the next report that we kind of undershot that guess a little bit. But in all, these are expenditures that are Esser 2 and Esser 3 related and are not have no impact on the local budget. Moving forward, the thing that we're always looking at is our Division 3 and local salaries. We should be about 85% roughly through April 30th. And you can see we were tracking about 86.5. So that's something that, we're keeping a real close eye on, as well as when we get into our conversations for the preliminary budget for next year. Our Esser 2 and Esser 3 expenditures, again, this is very much in line with what we just spoke about and how over the course of the next several months, we'll be looking at reviewing these. And one of the things we do plan on doing is changing the names of these operating units, because we have found that to be very confusing. For example, the superintendent Esser would more appropriately be called something like safety and security. So we are going to be looking at making those descriptions more representative, as opposed to just kind of the coding that's provided within the system. And this is our prior year expenditure report. We talk about this each month, and these are all the expenditures for appropriations prior to 2022. Our cash flow statement, this is really the most important item for us. And this is where we had anticipated being. So this number is fluctuating a little bit between April and May. It really kind of depends on what kind of revenues we continue to see. So at the end of April, roughly anticipating about a an $11.3 million carry forward. That number is going to come down a little bit, as you'll see in a moment in the May report. Before I move on to the May report, are there any questions on the April report? No, I will move ahead.
Yes, if it pleases the board, will we vote on all these at once, or do you want to vote them individually?
That's your preference.
All at once? All right, keep going.
All right, so we're now in our May 31st. So again, you're going to notice quite a bit of difference in activity between last month and this month. The end of May was the time period to which we cut off purchase orders in the system. That provides us the opportunity in the business office to essentially begin to close out the year, as there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get ready for June 30th when the system shuts down, so that we can then bring ourselves into fiscal year 23. So a couple of things, again, we're roughly about 92%. That anticipated like salary and OEC number, that will be much closer when we get to the June report. Probably we'll see another $7 or $8 million coming in the month of June to take care of that balance. Again, you can see that our transportation number, I highlighted it there, is a bit of a higher revenue, and you're going to see higher expenditures as well. It's the same thing with our food, our like child nutrition program. It has a considerable bump in our revenue. And you can see from last year, we kind of shifted that number down just because of COVID. The last 2 years have been very atypical for us. But you can also see that we are over 100%. So we're about $200,000 over our anticipated receipts. I would anticipate that we're going to get probably another $500,000. Focusing right in here. So we're about $200,000 in excess of our anticipated budget for our local tax. And again, we're anticipating with our senior tax credit final portion, as well as our June payment, probably another $500,000 to come in on that. Again, this is the first time ever that we've gone an entire fiscal year without interest. And that's been quite a very disappointing thing for us. We're hoping at some point that begins to come back, and they're telling us it's probably not going to be until November or December that we would anticipate begin to see interest. We're going to keep pressing them for it and see what's going on there. But certainly that's had an impact on us because last year we received about $600,000. So moving along, expenditures. So the number that sticks out on this page, really there's three that I wanted to bring your attention to. You can see last month we were about $600,000 in our balance for our buildings. The Esser 2 and Esser 3, this is where if we go from last month, between last month and this month, the number of purchase orders that have been processed for Esser projects and expenditures has been like roughly about $4 million, with the largest portion of that being that emergency connectivity purchase order. So about $2.6 million of that amount is what's going to be essentially come back into the system once those items are received and that federal program makes that payment. So this is again where having 1/3 of the budget on here was essentially a guess. And that 4.6 overage has no impact on our local funds. It has an impact on the 36 million in total. So that will just, when we go through and we make our final budget recommendations for fiscal year 23, I think we'll have a little bit of a better idea of more of a pinpointed number. Now with child nutrition and our district transportation programs, similar with there being an increase in revenue, that's going to directly lead to an increase in expenditure. So for child nutrition operations, that's a sole functioning program. All of the revenues that come in are used to purchase items and pay salaries. There's been a considerable increase in cost for products. The supply chain is really transportation costs, fuel surcharges. There's been a considerable increase. So I would say that as it relates to our child nutrition operations, that a considerable amount of that overage is not personnel related. It is really more towards supplies. But again, there's been a lot more activity. So with a lot more revenue coming in, we would expect to see increased expenditures. And then same thing with our district transportation. We're about 10% over budget right now, 11.5%. And with all of the fuel costs, and again, we do have additional employees this year, again, trying to incentivize drivers. We have annualized more drivers, meaning we have more drivers that have benefits. Now, when that happens, there's more state portion that comes to us as well, which is where that corresponding revenue comes in. So as we continue to try to figure out ways to incentivize drivers and getting more drivers, because there's a considerable shortage at this point. But again, this is something that has very little local impact because we're receiving the majority of the funding from the state.
Dr. Hale,
yes.
Would we say that some of those efforts have helped us fare better than our neighbors in transportation?
I will knock on wood before I answer that question. Absolutely. I think we've gotten through the year. Now our challenge that we face is our summer programming. So as we see, we're utilizing a lot of Esser funding for additional summer programming. That means additional students, additional transportation. So we're working through some of those challenges as our drivers, much like our educators, are looking for a little bit of a break in the summer. But we have a lot of programming happening throughout our buildings this year, which is great. But it does provide a bit of a challenge for the transportation department. But they're doing a great job working through it, and we're doing what we can, working through incentivizing individuals to come and drive the bus. So if anybody's interested, go through maybe a speedy training program for you. Looking at our Division 3 local salaries, 94%, we should be trending about 92.3. So we are going through in the month of June, doing a little bit of recoding. So that number probably will trend up over 100%. But in all, I think we are doing very well. Our operating unit expenditure for prior years, as you can see, again, this is the same report that we go over, as well as our Esser funding. Now, again, this is considerably different than last month based on those additional expenditures. But in all, you can see here that we have roughly 20 million of the 36 million remaining. So as we budget that moving forward, we'll have a lot better idea. A lot of the expenditures that have been made early on have been ones that we know are going to be like things like technology and items that have multi-year useful lives. Looking at our May 31st, have a little bit of a better idea. You can see that the June 30 balance came down a little bit from our last report. So at this point, I'm anticipating roughly $10.8 million carry forward. You know, and we had anticipated in our final budget at 10.7. So we're coming in pretty much dead on where we thought we were going to be. Still a chance, depending on what those tax revenues look like in June, that it could be a little bit higher than that. But I know it's not going to be lower than that. So we'll hope that I would love to see 11, but we'll see over the course of the next week. Any questions on the May report?
Any questions from the board? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve items B and C, monthly financial report for April and monthly financial report for May, subject to audit.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Tax rate proposal, Dr. Hale?
Yes, this one, each year the county asks us before I believe it's the second Tuesday or second Thursday in July, that the board vote on the tax warrant that can be used to generate bills for our residents within Brandywine School District. And I'm very pleased to say that, you know, for the third year in a row that this tax warrant has not changed. So the information that you see here for fiscal year 23 reflects no change in overall tax, as well as no change within each of the categorical areas. So this tax warrant, which we call this a $2.5385 per $100 of assessed valuation, has not changed since last year. So again, that's something that the way that we determine whether those other items, meaning debt service and tuition and match, has to do is, so when we're going through our preliminary budget, where we're thinking we're going to end up with our balances is really what impacts these numbers. So certainly tuition is something that we're keeping a close eye on. That's something that we have not made an adjustment in that rate for at least 3 years, which, you know, we're coming up on having to take a closer look at that maybe next year and make some adjustments. But the other one too is debt service. We are retiring a lot of debt. So that's something that we'll be looking at over the course of the next fiscal years to see how that could potentially impact that 21.5 cent debt service rate. But we reviewed this with the District Finance Committee and making a recommendation for the board to approve this so we can get it to the county.
Any questions from the board? Do I have a motion to accept the tax rate proposal for fiscal year 2023?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Specialized printers.
All right, this one is, and we have Dr. Kutch here as well that could assist in this. Basically, some of the funding that we received through Esser, called Esser Perkins. One of our teachers, Judd Wagner, had made the recommendation for us to go through and to purchase a printer, a very specialized printer. And the way that I'm going to describe this is exactly how Dr. Kutch provided for me, is that the specialized printers, like it prints on various materials, large paper, vinyl, cloth. They'll serve as a printer in multiple pathways, such as our marketing and digital communications, and it'll also be used to support work-based learning experiences for our students. Now, because this is not a state contract vendor, and this is a fairly specialized printer based on the value, we were required to go out to bid. Now, based on the submissions, we received one submission. And that's from Amtech. So what we are asking for is the board's permission to move forward with the purchase of this printer at $87,156. So it's not only the low bidder, it's the only bidder. Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. Yes, it's 3 for a total of $87,156.
And Dr. Hill, that money is Esser funds?
Yes, Esser Perkins funding. So it's something that's, it has to be kind of career program related expenditures.
And this will be, you said, used in student pathways. Is there any anticipation of like general district?
Oh, I mean, I think that like certainly there's the availability, we have in each of our programs, I would say that, yes, there would be the availability to use it, but certainly it would be program specific. It's not something that we would be like the copy room where someone's going to go in and like, hey, I want to print a poster on the wall type of a situation. But
Do we have any idea how many students would benefit from having something that's worth more than most people's salary?
Just to clarify, it would be across 3 buildings. It would be in several of our pathways, our marketing pathway, our digital communications pathway, even in our engineering pathway. The way that it would be used is with our level 3 students. So as they matriculate up in our work-based learning, school enterprise. And so they could be working with outside vendors or even within the school district, working on several different projects in the design. So using online software and such to gain a better understanding. In terms of numbers of students, it would be well into the hundreds.
Every year.
Every year. Mhm. And the fee also includes servicing of the devices and professional development for the teachers.
And this is new technology, not replacement technology?
Correct. So correct, an enhancement.
And I know it indicates initial staff training on use and operations. Depending on the timing, if we could incorporate some student leaders into that of those pathways, that senior level students, top level students to, give them that knowledge as well would be helpful.
Absolutely. And in fact, in the past, we've also incorporated that such model, working with our current large equipment such as our CNC mills.
Dr. Kutch, do you know how often we'll have to upgrade the software?
Usually we'll be on, we try to get on a refresh cycle, but these typically, and I believe it's in the bid of how long it is. I don't know off the top of my head. But it wouldn't be like 3 year, it would be an extension of that. And usually with a software update, it would be just a software update and not the entire piece of equipment.
And we received a Esser Perkins grant for this.
So there's no local, this is not local fund.
Right.
So it's something that has to be specifically used for career and technical program.
Right.
I just want to clarify what's nice about this. Typically, when we do that and look at something that's Perkins specific, it's usually for one pathway. What's nice about this is that it's across multiple.
And Dr. Kutch, I would add that I think it's about as transformational as the ShopBot CNC mills were that were installed in each of the CTE tech.
In our design and engineering program, correct. And so what's, again, this particular piece is specifically targeted to marketing and digital communications, but could be used across different pathways.
Move to accept the superintendent's recommendation.
I have an additional question before.
I guess we have a motion. Do I have a second? Then we can take questions. Motion and a second.
So moved.
Motion and a second. Any questions or further discussion?
My question about this is with regards to the site program, and the students in the site program have copyworks or print works. I know that they're doing printing. They've had opportunities, I think with Mr. Heller, to do some garment printing as well through screen printing. How often would the students in that program have access to these printers?
I mean, I would say that the site program itself has the equipment. I mean, we go through the leasing process. So like Canon, for example, are the machines that for pretty much the entire district because they're on state contract. This being, I guess, a more specialized, they have, for example, if we're looking at like T-shirt printing machines and things. So, I mean, we're working through some purchases for them that are not going to be necessarily as high a cost for a printer. So Heather Austin, for example, has some information into us that we're looking at now to purchase a couple additional printers for them. I'm not going to say that they're exactly like these, but as she's gone through specifications of things that she's worked through with the group there. So I basically just wanted to say that, we have been providing the site program with additional program. That would not be something that we would be able to use Esser Perkins funding for there. But we have been supporting the program and purchasing additional equipment and things for site as well.
So we have a motion to accept the contract, be awarded to the highest scoring vendor, Amtech. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Salary recommendations, Dr. Hale?
All right, as part of the preliminary budget that we're going to review in a few minutes, wanted to make a recommendation for fiscal year 23 salaries. I've provided some information over the last couple of weeks to the board to kind of begin to prepare for some of the differences that we're going to be seeing in fiscal year 23. So it's important to note that a number of our employee groups are in bargaining units. And for those groups, we're not required, because the board has approved those contracts, to come forward with a salary recommendation. So what we're required to do annually is to come to the board if we're asking for there to be any change in the salaries for our non-unionized work groups. So what I wanted to do is just do a very brief kind of explanation on what we're calling the 27 pay. So there's been a lot of conversation as to the 27 pay. And what I'm trying to do here is to provide an example as to how some of our groups that have what we call state and local portions of their salary. So what I mean by that is, and I'm going to use the teacher group as an example, that there is a established salary structure that includes both scale for that, where then our local bargaining unit groups will then go through and they will negotiate the local portion for those. So what's happening in the state's budget is that they are providing 2% increase on the state portion of the scale, as well as what the state will be doing is providing employees with one additional state portion check. So what is happening in fiscal year 23 is we would normally have 26 pay cycles. We get paid every other Friday in Delaware. And if you look at every other Friday on the calendar and you count it through, that would happen 26 times in a typical fiscal year. Well, every 11 years, something weird happens and there's 27 of them. So we have to account for that in our budget, as well as how that's going to be accounted for in our payroll system. So what is going to happen in the payroll system is that the state portion is going to be increased by 2% based on someone that has a master's degree and 17 years of experience, 87,102. That person is at the top of the scale. The increase that you see going into fiscal year 23, what their salary will be, is $88,655. That includes the state portion's 2%, as well as the 1.5% that's going to be coming through the contract the negotiated contract amount. What the state is also going to do is provide that additional state portion. That 1936 is 1/26th of the state portion. That gets added to the state's amount. And what that but what the person will be paid over the course of the 27 pays is $90,591. And that is an increase over the prior year of 3.85%. So to provide an additional example, for someone that is in a position to receive a step, meaning if you're going from step 1 to 2 or 10 to 11 or 11 to 12, the reason I picked 17 on the last example was because it was the top, meaning like there was no step 18. In this example, someone that has a master's degree plus 15 credits that started fiscal year 22 on the 10th, they'll go into fiscal year 23 on the 11th, which means they go up a step. So what's going to happen for this individual is that scale that we're looking at is exactly the same, but where you look at the positioning of where that individual is based on that same scenario that we just looked at, this individual will see an increase over last year of 7.36%. Now, it's very important to note that the local portion 1.5, as we're going through the budget, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, the increase in salary on the local portion will stay relatively consistent over the past several years. And that a majority of what you're seeing there as that increase is being assumed by the state. So the reason that I show these examples is because we have a number of our employee groups that do not have prescribed state and local portion scales. And what we do is when we come to make the recommendation to the board, we always do an analysis to determine what some of those other employee groups before we would make our recommendation for for example, our administrators, our specialists, mid-level professionals and technology staff. And then we have also the other group, which is our clerical. So I'd like to just real quickly go through each of those because really we're making 3 recommendations. So looking at the first example of the employee that was receiving, I would say that for our educators, we're looking anywhere between a 3.9 and a 7.5% increase, depending on where you fall on the scale. We have some employee classifications, for example, some of our paraeducators will see an increase of up to 10% this year, depending on where they are. So when we make a recommendation for our administrators and our specialists, we keep in mind that the recommendation that we're making is not higher than the lowest of what our other employee groups are seeing. Again, we're being conscious of that, but at the same time, we want to recognize to make sure that we're being fair and equitable amongst all of our employee groups. So the recommendation that we're making is not to change our scale. So right now, all of our salary schedules for each of these classifications, the recommendation is not to change the scale, but to provide those employee groups with an additional, that additional portion of that 27th pay. So in lieu of doing that, for example, the administrative group will see a 3.87% increase, of which the total cost locally is about $315,000, which the district will assume about half of that, meaning the state will assume the other half. Because like the other, there are, even though it is not a state and local split, there are still amounts that we receive from the state based on positioning and administrative units and things like that, but it's not prescribed like it is for our other employee groups. So again, the thing that's really important to note is that over the course of those 27 pay cycles, the 3.87% will be realized. But when we move into the following fiscal year, it's important to recognize that the scale hasn't changed. We're not recommending a scale increase of 3.875. We're recommending essentially like a funding 3.875. So we will have to readdress the scale when we move into fiscal year 24, which is something that we plan on doing and making some revisions to some of our scales. So again, the recommendation that we're making for not only our administrative group, but our specialist mid-levels and our technology staff is to provide the local portion of that 27th pay, which makes the equivalent in total for those individuals 3.875, which again is lower than the lowest of our other employee groups. Now, slightly different is our clerical employees, custodial chiefs, facility specialists, and food service managers. And those numbers next to them are the number of individuals that we're talking about. Now, those groups are 12-month employees that do have a state and local scale. So it's slightly different, but these are different, meaning like because they're 12-month employees, it's a different section of the code. It's different. So for these 62 employees, what we're recommending is for to allow for that 2% increase from the state on those scales, and then allow that information to then flow through the scale. So those employee groups will see very similar to those of our educators and like paraeducators, anywhere between 5 and 8.75%, depending on where they are on the scale. And again, it's important to note here that again, the total cost being about $148,000, of which in this case, the district will only assume about $42,000. So I know there's a lot of numbers and stuff, whatever, flying around here, and it's when we get into the preliminary budget, maybe we'll be able to kind of go through these a little bit more again, but the recommendation for these is all incorporated within the preliminary budget. We are asking for the board's consideration in approving this evening. And then the preliminary budget will be for information purposes. So I'm going to stop and allow for questions, and then we'll go from there.
So can you touch on again? I know you say that there is a state portion, but why is the state portion so varied between the three groups?
So varied in the three groups? No, it's a great question. Because of the way the state reimburses the district. So what we don't want to say is pass through. Pass through would assume that the increase that's happening to the state portion of the scale automatically gets passed through, because in the top two categories, our scale is a number. It's not a state and local split. So the number that's there is the number, and that number only changes when the board changes the number. So the reason why the amount varies is because every one of our individuals in those classifications have different degree levels and years of experience. So when we go through the process, and this is one of the primary things that Angie oversees, is that we go through a calculation for each individual person to determine how much money we get back from the state. So going through this example of that 3.87%, half of it is coming from the state. So for example, if we didn't do that, then the district is making money. I'm not sure if that is, so what we're ensuring here by this is very similar to the other employee groups that were essentially passing through that increase on an equitable basis to each of these employee classifications. So this year, again, when we go back into, when we look at like fiscal year 24, if we don't make an adjustment to the scale, everyone in these groups here will see their checks go down, because the way that the math works is that we're then now going back to 26 pays and it shifts through. So what we'll be looking to do in going into fiscal year 24 is to make an adjustment to the scale. Now the question may be, well, why not make an adjustment to the scale this year? And that is, the adjustments to the scale are forever. And that then moving forward, if we were to make an adjustment to the scale, that means that the scale is higher than next year when we go to make the adjustment moving forward. And again, so this provides us the opportunity to provide a nice increase, but then to not impact the scales, so that we can essentially kind of get back to the objective of looking at the scales for next year.
And have all the CFOs gotten together? Is there similar proposals across districts?
I would say that of 19 districts, there's probably about 7 different ways that it's being handled throughout. But I would say that, I would say that there's another 3 or 4 or 5 that are doing similar things to us.
Any other questions from the board? Then do I have a motion to accept the recommendation to approve the salary recommendations for fiscal year 23?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay.
Preliminary budget.
So thank you very much. Last and certainly not least is the first read, I would say, of the preliminary budget for fiscal year 23. Again, we're not looking for a recommendation on this one to provide the board an opportunity to review this document because I know it's 10:30 and there's a lot of numbers on the screen. So as we go through the next month, if there's questions, certainly we'll meet with you individual. So really what this is, what you're looking at is the preliminary budget numbers for 23 in comparison to our budget from fiscal year 22. Now you are going to see some differences on this, maybe more so than you've seen in years past. And certainly Esser has had an impact on that. So what you can see here is we're not anticipating a considerable increase in our property taxes. Brandywine School District is not a growth district, as we would call it. So the increase in assessed valuation is limited. We know that a reassessment is coming shortly. They've already begun that process. They haven't met with us about it, but we know that they've begun and they're going to be meeting with us in the next couple months, but they anticipate July of 25, that being completed. So what we're looking at here as we move forward is our discretionary income. The big number difference that you see here, $4.2 million increase is what we're projecting for additional revenue from the state. Again, one of the big differences between fiscal year 23 than the last 10 is that there will be 27 pay cycles. July 1st, there's a paycheck. There's one in the middle of the year, and then June 30th is the next, is that 27th one. So there's an entire paycheck that's different. So having to account for that with what the state's planning on doing and what we're doing locally is all incorporated within this document. This next page is what we're looking at as relates to our other areas. So when I talk about making the tax warrant, we look at things like the tuition tax and make a projection as to the level of expenditures percentage increase from year to year to kind of see where we are. And that's where I'm saying we're going to have to continue to take a look at that because we are seeing increased costs with special education as we have over the last several years. And at some point, there is going to be the need for us to take a look at increasing that. Debt service, on the other hand, is one where we're seeing a reduction in debt. So that one is actually coming down pretty considerably. So again, that may even provide us the opportunity to balance through some of those rates, but that's something we can talk about at a later date. Big number here, you know, we budgeted for and received the entire $36 million in Esser last year. So like, that's a pretty strange looking adjustment there. Something that I'm trying to fool around with to see it putting on there. I mean, it looks odd to me. So, but it is what it is. I wanted to keep it on there. So we will continue to kind of take a look at that. So it doesn't look like such a strange, like we have a reduction of revenue of $35 million. And we also, again, saw our capital funding for the Bush program at $25 million last year. This is just the assessed valuation, and I won't go through that in incredible detail, but essentially it's the overall assessed valuation of Brandywine School District, takes into consideration the tax pool. And then you can see what each of those rates generate for us in this bottom section down here. So the true budget, as we would say, I know I'm going to blow this up. So this is the expenditure budget, and each of the categories that you see on the left-hand side correspond with what we report on in our monthly reports. The far right is where you can see the differences in what the fiscal year 23 preliminary budget is compared to last year's budget. You can see at the very top, that there is a difference projected of nearly $7 million in personnel costs. And again, that's directly related to the 27th pay. But you can see there that there is a considerable difference between the state and the local portions. And again, we usually like to say like 70-30, 60-40, somewhere in that range is usually what the split is. But this takes into consideration all the recommendations that we just made, as well as what the state is going to be doing with their budget. Now, on the far right in red, if it's negative, that means that we've made adjustments. Now, that's probably more adjustments than we're used to seeing. And a couple of the things I'd like to go through really quick, some of the larger ones. You can see there that under the instructional technology refresh, we have for the last several years been budgeting about $750,000. With all of the equipment that we've purchased through Esser, just did not seem responsible for us to continue to put that number on there. So I reduced that to 300,000 because there still are some additional expenditures that we will need from that, and something that we're going to kind of continue to look at as we move into the future, because the key is we know at some point Esser's going away. So we're going to need to keep in mind what that refresh would look like for the next refresh, and continue to make sure that we're planning forward for that. The big difference that we're seeing here is where it says business office finance reduction of 1.3 million. That's directly related to substitute cost. That has always been where we have made all of the expenditures for substitutes. And a majority of the substitute expenditures are coming out of Esser as part of the grant. So you see that reduction is in there. Again, that's something that we're going to have to continue to monitor as we look into the future, because at some point Esser is going to go away. There are some things being worked out through the state. They're trying to provide units, and there's a bunch of bills have been introduced. We're hoping in the next couple of years that we could see some state supported substitutes, which would be a great thing. But just some of the other areas that we've gone through and looked at, we know debt service is going to be going down from last year, as well as some of the expenditures as we've gone through and kind of analyzed what some of those overages have been. We have not made any adjustments to the building budgets. That's not something that we usually do until the final budget, and we would look at enrollments through the September 30th count and make any necessary adjustments there. So the key here is as we're looking is that next year we're anticipating local fund balance of roughly $9.3 million. So over the course of the last several years, we've been somewhere floating around that 12 million. So it's beginning to come down as we would anticipate. So we've been fortunate, but at some point we know that $9.3 million is going to get to the point where we're going to need to consider referendum. So that's something that, that number is beginning to get towards that low watermark number. So that's something that we're going to continue to look at. And as we get through the rest of this year, meaning the rest of this fiscal year, and kind of see where the revenues wind up, that number probably is going to come up a little bit, but I wanted to be conservative in making sure that I'm providing that anticipated balance there. And similar with our tuition, you can see that we're anticipating ending the year with about $1 million in that tuition program. These are just kind of blown up versions of what you saw on the previous page, kind of for each of the areas. What I'm going to jump to, if I could, is this final page, which we call our financial summary, and it's just a summary of the revenues and expenditures for each of those categories. And you can see that the 9.3 aligns. Last year we anticipated 10.7. You can see we're right about on that mark. So that would be pretty much in line with kind of what we've seen in reductions in that balance over the course of the last several years. Looking at our tuition funding, we have some additional purchase orders and things that we've put through this year that we would have probably put in as next fiscal year purchase orders. So the fact that balance is, we might say, well, why does there not need to be $1.7 million there? And it doesn't work exactly the same for our tuition programs as it does for the others because of how the funding comes through with the units and everything. So that's something, again, what I would anticipate is next year having to make a decision on increasing our tuition tax. Looking at our others debt service, we know that number's coming down. But in total, this is, I think we're in good shape. Again, ending the year locally with 9.3 million we're in a good place. We've been able to get through quite a number of years with our last referendum, but I think certainly we can see that we know that we're heading in the direction of needing to begin those conversations. So again, this is just for information. We reviewed it in detail with the District Finance Committee, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
So the change, and normally you say we target around 11 or 12 million with our June 30 balance. And it's now projected at the 9.8 or whatever the figure was. I mean, is that directly attributed to the added expense of the 27th pay? Or, I mean, there's a number of factors there, but is that a big part of it?
I would say that it's maybe a slight part of it, because the way that we're handling the 27th pay here is it's not that much different than it would be if it was 26. So what we're looking at it more of on a increased basis than it would be over 27 pays. So locally, all of our employee groups are not receiving an additional full pay, because each employee group is different. That's where those recommendations come in. So the local portions of each of those scales, how they change, it really, when we look at what someone makes between July 1st and June 30th, that amount stays relatively consistent, whether it's 26 or 27 pays. So, but it does absolutely have an impact on it. And what I would anticipate is not seeing as much of a reduction in that balance going from 23 into 24.
And you mentioned the dreaded R word. As we start to talk about that and look at the retirement of debt, is there an opportunity for us to do a no increase referendum?
I would say that we could do that for, I don't know if you're speaking that on like a capital projects basis, or I would say that, well, I guess, yes, you could answer your question. Yes. Think about that for a second. 10:30.
Any other questions from the board? This is not an action item, so thank you for the preliminary. Reach out to Dr. Hale if you have any questions in the coming weeks regarding this preliminary budget.
Great.
General information meeting dates: board meeting July 18th, August 15th, and September 19th. And I believe Superintendent Holler, we have a workshop slated for August. Maybe we can confirm the date, and we'll have that on the next meeting agenda. But that should be sometime mid to early August.
Correct. And don't forget Reverend Perry's request for a public forum between now and July 18th.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really, July to 13th, 18th. I mean, I think we really need to target something within the next 2 weeks or so we can get sufficient notice. And I think we have to move on it quickly. So we'll get those out to the public as soon as we can. With that, I will thank everyone for their time and attention and participation this evening. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. This concludes our June meeting.